Do you know where you can learn all of English grammar? Well, you can learn it in this video. 1,500 English grammar rules explained. You're going to learn everything you need to know about English grammar to get to the top level. There's a free PDF you can download to follow while you're watching the video. There's links to more in-depth videos on every grammar point you can see here, so you can get more examples and longer explanations from me. And there are timestamps. If you go to the video description, you can click on the topic you're interested in and go straight to that point in the video. We'll start with a detailed guide to question rules in English. So let's start with the basics of question rules. In English, there are two types of question. There are questions that can be answered yes or no, such as, did you go to college today? That can only be answered yes or no. But then there are other questions which we call open-ended. If I say, where did you go to college? Then any answer is possible. I went to college in London, I went to college in New York, I went to college in Mumbai, anywhere in the world. These yes or no questions are formed in the following way. We have the auxiliary, then the subject, then the verb infinitive. So, for example, here, did is an auxiliary, you is the subject, and go is the verb infinitive. There are different auxiliaries, though. One of the major auxiliaries is simply the verb to be. For example, are you ready? For other main verbs used to do you like pasta? And with certain tenses, the auxiliary is made with have. Have you been to Paris? Also, we can replace the auxiliaries with modals. Can you complete your exercises today? Could you do your homework? Will you finish your work on time? Would you like extra time? May I see your writing? Might I be given a second chance to complete the homework? Must we give our homework to you today? Shall we revise some more? Should we take the teacher's advice? And these are the main full modals. When we have a main full modal, then we don't use the auxiliary, we use the modal at the start of the question instead. Now, you may have noticed that we're using the verb infinitive here. So, how do we change tense with questions? Well, with yes or no questions, tense is expressed through the auxiliary. So here are some examples. If the auxiliary is to be, then an example of the present simple, is it cold outside? So is the present simple in the third person of the verb to be. For the present continuous, are you looking for a coat? So the verb has the ing form here. With the past simple, this would be was or were. So was the coffee nice? And with the past continuous, an example, were children playing in the snow? When it comes to do, the present simple could be, does your house have heating? So does has the tense formed from the verb to do, and the main verb is have here, doesn't change, it stays in the infinitive. With the past simple, did you wear warm clothing? So wear stays as the infinitive, tense changes on to do into the past did. With to have, we may say, have you seen the weather forecast? Or had you known about the snow? So had is the past perfect and have is the present perfect. But remember this, do not use do as an auxiliary with modals. The following example is not possible. Do you can spell your name? I do see this sometimes used by students. Don't mix it up. Don't use the auxiliary and the modal in your question. Now for open-ended questions, and remember these are questions where any answer is possible. Firstly, we need to know the words you can use to make these questions. At the start of the sentence, we generally use WH question words with one exception. So who is for people, what for things or information, when for time, where for places, why for reasons, how is the exception, doesn't start WH, this is for manner, Which is to do with choices from a range of options. And whose is belonging or possession. Finally, whom, well, that is people, but notice I've said something at the end here. As an object of the sentence, who and whom are similar. I'll come to more about how you distinguish between the two later. So let's look at the grammatical structure of a simple open-ended question. So we start with this WH word, when, then the auxiliary, does, then the subject, the bus, and then the verb infinitive, leave. So this is a simple question. They don't always follow this pattern. In this pattern, bear in mind that the WH word is the object in the answer. And that's going to be important when we distinguish between the object and the subject when we're talking about open questions. So when does the bus leave? It leaves tonight. So tonight is in the object position of the sentence, it leaves tonight. Tonight represents when. So when is representing the object here. Now, when we move to the subject, we use this pattern instead. The WH word, then the verb, which now takes the tense, and then any extra information afterwards. For example, who lives here? And we notice that live has the S at the end. Who, what, and which can be the subject of a question. However, other question words usually cannot be the subject. There are some exceptions where people use them very informally, but if you're writing or trying to be professional with your English, it's best not to use them. For instance, when leaves the train is impossible in English. You can't use it because when is not a question word that we can make the subject of the sentence. How has some special uses because we can add words after it and change the meaning of it somewhat. So how often means the amount of when followed with quantity words. For example, how much means the quantity. What is the amount? How far? The distance. What is the amount? How fast? The speed. What is the amount? And there's many other words we can use after how in this way. Now let's look at which, what, and whose, because they also have particular extra uses, because they can be followed by a noun specifying the thing being asked about. So instead of just saying, what are you waiting for? I've had it here, what train are you waiting for? So the noun train comes after what to specify the thing being asked about. So it's not just anything. We're not just waiting for anything. Now we're talking about trains. We're limiting it to just trains that we're waiting for. Which can also do this too. Which way are you going? And there's an important difference between what and which with this, which we'll come to in a moment. And whose drink did we forget to bring? So drink tells us what type of possession we are talking about here. Now let's look at who and whom. We're going to look at some differences between these question words because who and whom can get confused easily. Now, who, WHO, can be both a subject and object, but whom can only be an object. So all of these sentences are correct here. Who lives here? Tom lives here. Who is the subject? Because Tom is the subject of the answer. Who did you call? I called Tom. Now Tom is the object. It's also correct to say whom did you call? I called Tom. But we would very rarely say whom lives here. That sounds wrong to the native English speaker. Now for the difference between which and what. Which has to include an element that specifies the question unless it's obvious from context. That's the purpose of which. We're making a choice when we say which. But what does not need this element? So compare these two. Which train are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? But we couldn't say which are you waiting for. What can leave it open. We could mean anything here, but which has to be a choice to do with a specific word or range or group of things. Which train are you waiting for? So what is more general, which is more specific? Certain words can be used instead of auxiliaries. Used to can be used for past habits and routines. Who used to come here as a child? So not who did this or who came here as a child, but used to now goes in that position. And also got for questions which are in the passive. Who got wet as they travelled to work this morning? So got wet means you received something. You could have said who got soaked, where soaked is actually the verb. Wet here is an adjective, so it's not quite the example where we have a verb. Got would be the main verb if it's who got wet, because wet is an adjective and got is the only verb here. But if I said who got soaked, then soaked is an activity, the main verb, and got means that you received it. Who got soaked? And when we use got for the passive, we generally mean that there was some participation of your own in making it happen. You only got soaked because you went out in the rain. So there's more sort of involvement in the action that you receive when you use got. But got can be put in that position before the verb as a replacement for the passive form. So those are two alternatives that can go into question words that are not auxiliaries or not simply the verb in the subject question. Now to look at some alternatives when we look at open-ended questions. Let's look at prepositions. When a preposition ends a question, it can often be moved to the front too. Compare these questions which are to do with a city. The first one is a standard question with a WH word at the beginning. Which place in the city are they meeting at? We could alter that and say this instead. At which place in the city are they meeting? It's completely correct, and I've moved the preposition to the front. Now, there are some rules we need to follow when we move these prepositions to the front of questions, and some things we need to be aware of in what we're doing when we move the prepositions in this way. First of all, be aware that this often happens to increase formality with which, what, and whom. So having the preposition at the start of the question is considered quite formal. Now, notice that prepositions cannot usually be moved in a question beginning with who, where, or why. However, if the question is reformulated with which or what, it becomes possible. So look at the two examples here. Where are you going to? Now, because it's where, we would not usually put the preposition before the question word. We would not normally say, to where are you going? Again, you might just hear it in very informal English or poetic English or old English, but it's not very natural to a native speaker. But instead, if you do this, to which place are you going? You've reformulated the question using which, and now it works because we're using which with the preposition. So that's the way to get the preposition to the front if you're using alternate or these different question words. Now, prepositions can be moved to the front of questions starting how? If the question word means the amount of and is followed by an adjective or a determiner. You remember earlier we looked at how the word how can be followed by another word to find out the amount of a quantity. So look at these examples here. For how long should we stay here? That's an alternative for how long should we stay here for? So if how long was the beginning of the question, for was at the end, you can move for to the beginning to make it more formal. Also, after how many tries should we give up? That's the same as saying how many tries should we give up after? So after can be moved to the front. But we wouldn't move up to the front because it's a part of give up. And this is because it's a phrasal verb. Some questions end with a phrasal verb consisting of verb plus preposition. Be careful with these because in these instances, we do not move the preposition to the front of the question. We need to keep the verb and preposition together when they make a phrasal verb like give up, because the risk is then we lose the meaning of the verb because the verb preposition together make its own unique meaning. You may not have thought about the importance of the word happening with questions, but happening is a really useful word to use in questions. Native speakers will use this a lot in their questions. Happening is often used in questions that ask about current or future events. For example, what's happening in the movie? What's happening in the city tomorrow? What's happening in the movie? Well, that's talking about a movie you're watching now. What's happening in the city tomorrow? Well, tell me about events that are in the future. Very useful word in questions. Another useful word is doing, which is often used in questions that ask about current or future activities too. What are you doing? I'm washing the dishes. So what are you doing? That's asking about your activities now. What are you doing tomorrow? I'm going on a trip. Activities in the future. How do we tell the difference? Well, with both happening and doing, if we don't add a time phrase, it usually means now. To make it future, simply add the time phrase. Tomorrow, next week, next year. And instantly you're asking about the future happening or doing. Embedded questions change the rules completely, and this is where a WH word is placed in the middle of a sentence, and we don't use a question mark at all. We call this embedding. Why would we do this? Well, we can do this when reporting a question. I asked where she lived. Notice it's not a question. Notice we have the WH word in the middle, followed by the subject and the verb. And here the verb takes the tense. We can also use it when making questions more polite or formal, particularly with words like could or would. I would like to know when the restaurant opens. So this is an alternative to saying, when does the restaurant open? We make it an indirect embedded question in the sentence, but again, it takes tense. We don't use the question mark. Another purpose is when certain additional information is emphasized. I want to know what the time is. So we start off with, I want to know, and then we specify it with this embedded question. And then finally, when the method of instruction itself is more important. Tell me what the time is. Here, tell me gets more importance, so it's put at the beginning. I'm giving you an instruction. I want an answer to this. So we emphasize the instruction by putting it at the beginning of the sentence and then using the question as an embedded question afterwards. Now here's some more on embedded questions. When questions are embedded and the question word represents the object, omit the auxiliary between the question word and the subject verb and put the main verb in its correct tense. And that's what we did in lots of the examples on the previous slide. Now, that's a lot of words, so perhaps it may be better to look at the example here. I want to know what she bought. What's the answer? She bought food. What she bought? She bought food. So what represents the object here? Because it's an embedded question, you need to leave out the auxiliary and then put the verb in the correct tense. Buy becomes bought. When questions are embedded and the question word represents the subject, then you can keep the original question format. I want to know who lives there. Who lives there? I live there. So I represents who, it's the subject this time. What would have been the question if it wasn't embedded? Who lives there? The same. So there's no change to the format when the question word represents the subject. Let's move on. If and whether can indicate a question within a sentence. So we're introducing new words here that are not question words, that when we are asking a question within a sentence, we can use to show it is a question. For example, I don't know if you know the time. What does this mean? It means, what's the time? But if makes it like a choice. I don't know if you know the time. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but the listener hears it as a question. Question words can also be what we call clefs. This is where the clause is moved to the front of the sentence for emphasis. We'll look more at cleft sentences later in this video. Let's look at an example here. Who lives there is a mystery. So here we have two clauses together. There's no question mark at the end, but we have this question word clause at the beginning. Who lives there is a mystery. So it's kind of like a noun clause for the sentence. Let's imagine changing who lives there for something else. Maybe he is a mystery. That would be grammatically correct too. He is a mystery. Who lives there is a mystery. They both serve the purpose of the subject. What's happened here? We've moved the whole question to the beginning. And that is to place extra emphasis on that information. Question words can be used in clauses that define nouns too. Now, in these situations, they are not question word clauses, but relative clauses, because they're not answering a question. This is a lesson where you learn about grammar. Where you learn about grammar, well, it starts with the question word where, but the purpose here is simply to give more information about a lesson. It's nothing to do with a question at all. So just be aware that question words also have this second use of being relative pronouns that we use in relative clauses, such as the one underlined here. And these relative clauses describe nouns in more detail. Let's look at some more alternative formulations of questions. To place extra emphasis to the verb, do is sometimes added after a WH question, even where the question word is the subject. So, who ate the food last night? I ate the food last night, so it's a subject question. Grammatical rules say don't use the auxiliary, but there is this exception. If you want to add extra emphasis to the question and to the action here, then you can add the auxiliary for that reason. Who did eat the fish? It looked bad. So you're indicating some sort of surprise here. So it's not grammatically normal, but in speech, it is an acceptable thing to do if you want to bring extra emphasis. In speaking, we often make a statement become a question purely through changes to the intonation, particularly by raising our tone on the last word. So the sentence here is, you ate the fish. Normally that's a sentence without a question mark. But the normal intonation for saying it would be, you ate the fish. But I can make it a question simply by changing the tone of my voice on the last word. You ate the fish. And simply by changing that tone, that intonation, I make it a question, even though it's a sentence. This is often done to check information. What do you want to order? You want to order cola? So I'm checking the word cola, that I've got that right. Or it can be used to show surprise. Sorry? You drank 5 cups of cola in 10 minutes? So I've raised the tone at the end. It makes it a question, but really what I'm doing is I'm showing surprise that this had happened. I'm shocked that someone would drink 5 cups of cola in 10 minutes. It's also possible to repeat a statement but use a question word to check the part of the statement you wish to check. Again, that's a lot of words. The example is probably more helpful here. We're getting married in Africa. Now, maybe you didn't hear the word Africa, or you're surprised that it was Africa. So you reply like this. You're getting married where? And again, you raise your intonation on that final word. But by using the question word, you're checking the information or questioning the information. And you simply put the question word at the end when you're speaking. You wouldn't do this in writing. Now, another way to check an activity is to substitute with do what. So perhaps the woman is talking about the story about how her future husband proposed to her, and she says, he proposed to me on the beach. And her friend is checking what she said, perhaps with a bit of surprise. He did what? And that means, did he really propose to you on the beach? Some questions are used rhetorically. Now, what does rhetorical mean? That means you're simply drawing an attention to a truth, even if the answer is already known. So in this example at the bottom, didn't I tell you not to touch it? Then we say that rhetorically because we expect that they already knew the rules. Now, there's something extra about this particular rhetorical question. It starts with a negative auxiliary. Now, when we start rhetorical questions with a negative auxiliary, they really mean a positive. So, didn't I tell you not to touch it? This really means, I did tell you not to touch it. I told you not to touch it. Why are you doing it? Didn't I tell you? Words that are questions can be combined with modals as well when we're talking about open-ended questions. So remember, we said that we wouldn't combine an auxiliary with a modal, but you can combine it with the question word. Where might I find the tourist office? Oh, you'll find it over there. So where and might going together. In conversations, sometimes we use what's called reduced forms. These are often used for questions in keeping with the context of the dialogue that's already happened. How does this reduction happen? Well, we can omit the auxiliary. Here's a cafe. Oh, you hungry? Now, what we really mean here is, are you hungry? But because they're friends, because it's an informal situation, people are speaking quickly in a fluent way, they omit the auxiliary and go straight for the information. You hungry? Meaning, are you hungry? Totally normal in speech. We could omit the coordinating clause. I like fish. And what about chips? It's almost like you're continuing the sentence for them, but asking for them to fill in the extra information. You can simply answer with a noun in isolation. What would you like with your fish? Instead of saying, I would like chips, you can simply say chips. Again, very informal. And you can have preposition-led phrases or clauses to elicit extra information. So perhaps your answer is, I'd like chips. And then the response by the waiter or waitress is, with peas or beans? Now, informally again, because there's lots of changes we make to questions when we speak informally, a statement can be followed by a question word on its own if you only want to clarify specific information about the statement. We're getting married. When? So the question word is on its own because all we want to know is the time. So we use the question word that relates to the time. And questions can often be made more polite with a modal clause followed by an indirect question clause, typically with could or would. Could you tell me where the bathroom is? Would you let me know when the shop closes? So these are both more polite than simply saying, where is the bathroom? When does the shop close? So we use these modals to make them more polite. Now for wishes in English. Wishes has unusual grammar, so it's important that you watch this bit of the video, and you can find out more through the link in the video description to my special dedicated video on wishes. Now we're going to talk about the grammar to do with wishes. When we have a strong desire for something, we often use tenses in a slightly different way if we're using phrases such as wish or if only. For example, I wish you were here. Here we've used a past verb for a present wish. Here's how it works. With present wishes, I wish it were summer, not I wish it is summer. I wish everything would be okay, so we can use would for that purpose too. I wish I could keep warm. These are all ways of making present wishes. With future wishes, we can also use would. I wish it would stop raining. So would has this present and future purpose. I wish I could go to a hot place. So could also refer to the future too. I wish for a white Christmas. For means something coming in the future. I want it to happen to me. Now with past wishes, we shift back to the present perfect. I wish I had arrived earlier. Also, we can use structures with modals and then have, such as I wish I could have seen you. And with formal requests, then we do something different again. We use the to plus infinitive. I wish to speak to the manager. We can also say, I wish to be refunded. So here we're using a passive structure, the infinitive of to be, followed by the past participle. I'm going to share the rules for using reflexives in English now. These come from a longer video that explains everything in much more detail. But if you just want the quick description of the rules for reflexives in English, watch this. Now for grammar to do with using reflexives in English. Reflexives are this. When an action happens to the subject, not to the object, which is what normally happens, we sometimes use the reflexive form. For example, I cut myself when I was preparing food. Now, the reflexive pronouns that we use are myself instead of me, yourself instead of you, herself, himself, itself, ourselves, yourselves, and sometimes themselves and oneself. We use these reflexives when the subject and the object are the same. So when I said I cut myself, that means I did the action of cutting and the person affected was also me. Sometimes we need to use reflexives to make it clear it isn't someone else. I cut myself, not them. We could use it as an emphatic compliment. I am myself the winner. It brings more emphasis. You could use it as a head or tail of a sentence for emphasis. Myself, I believe this is true. So it's come at the beginning of the sentence. Sometimes it makes things more polite or formal. Who's the table for? Oh, myself and my wife. It could be used for reciprocal actions too. And if something is done alone or without help, using the reflexive form, I did it myself, makes it clear that you did it alone. Why do we use reflexives? Well, when we are preparing things for excessive force, responding to an outcome, if you injure yourself, when you're communicating for experiences, I had a great time myself, imperatives, and with some phrasal verbs. These are all situations where we might use a reflexive. Now I'm going to go quickly through the rules for clauses and sentences when they are simple. If you want to find out more about anything I say, then click on the link in the video description to my video, Every English Sentence Pattern Explained. Now we're getting into the basics of how we form clauses and sentences in English. There are two parts on this video that look at clauses and sentences. In a later part, we will look at what's called compound and complex sentences. So that's how we can combine different sentences together to make longer sentences, or what the purpose of writing is for. In this section, we're going to focus on the bare basics. How do we form a really good clause in English to make a sentence that's simple? The basic sentence patterns are subject followed by verb. For example, Kim sang. Here the subject does an action of singing. Or subject verb object. Kim sang a song. The subject does an action that affects the object. Kim was a good singer. The complement here describes the subject in the way prescribed by the verb. So this is called SVC, subject verb complement. A good singer describes Kim. Or subject verb adverbial, SVA. Kim sang beautifully. Here the adverbial is beautifully, and this describes the action of singing, or it describes the whole sentence. So that's the most simple way of making sentences. Now for the little ways in which they can change. And one common change is with indirect objects. This is where you have two objects. One receives the action and one is affected. So Kim sang me a song. Subject, verb, indirect object, direct object. So what did she sing? A song. But who did it affect? Me, because it was also aimed at me. We can change the order so the direct object comes first. Kim sang a song to me. Here we need to use to before the indirect object. We can also have different word orders with complements. So subject verb complement, where the complement is a noun. Kim was a good singer. That's a noun. Kim was excellent. Here the complement is an adjective. And Kim was on the stage. On the stage is a prepositional phrase. With adverbials, we have different patterns again. So Kim sang beautifully was our example of subject verb adverbial, but you can also have the object before the adverbial. Kim sang the song beautifully, or the adverbial before the preposition. Kim sang beautifully for the crowd. You could also say Kim sang for the crowd beautifully, and here P is the preposition phrase. In an exclamation, you could start with a question word and it's still a sentence. What a beautiful voice she has. So we're basically emphasizing the amount of the beauty in the voice. What a beautiful voice she has, question word, object, subject, verb. Completely different structure. Now for passive structures. There's a lot of variety in passive structures. So in the passive form, the action happens to the noun before the verb. Now in terms of position, this is the subject, but I'm going to call it O for the object because that represents the fact that something's happening to the noun, which is normally the object. Here are some possible structures. OV, object verb, and then by S. A song was sung by Kim. So Kim sings the song, so it all goes backwards. Kim comes last, the action comes before that, and the thing that's affected by the action goes at the beginning. So it switches the whole order, so the thing affected by the action goes first. It's called the passive form. We'll look at that in more detail in a later part of the video. We could also simply have OV, a song was sung. We know something happened through singing, which means a song, but now we don't know who did it. We could also say a song was sung by Kim beautifully, so the adverbial describes everything before. Or a song was sung beautifully by Kim. A song was sung to me. So here we simply have the indirect object and the direct object, and we leave out the person who did the activity. So to me means me is not the one who did it. Me is also the recipient. Now you could also put in the actor. A song was sung by Kim to me. So by Kim indicates who did it. And we have the direct object and the indirect object. A song was sung and the song was sung to me. We could actually switch the order of all of these words. So I could have said a song was sung to me by Kim, or I was sung a song by Kim. So me goes to the beginning of the sentence because it's in the subject position. Now we use I. And we can also finish with a prepositional phrase describing everything. A song was sung by Kim to the crowd. Now for imperative structures. Now an imperative is involving instructions or commands, and we omit the subject. It sounds simple, but there's lots of different rules to be aware of. in terms of both written and spoken English. So very simply, sing a song. That's an instruction to someone. Please do this. It doesn't have to be an object, though. It could be an adverbial, sing loudly. It could have two objects, sing me a song. It could have an object and an adverbial, sing a song loudly. Or the two objects and an adverbial, sing me a song loudly. Or we can even have just the verb sing. I'm telling you, sing, do this action. And now there are even more alternatives with imperatives. We can add do at the beginning for emphasis to the whole phrase. Do sing a song, but you have to emphasize this word if you use it. Don't use it unless you're emphasizing the word do. Please sing a song is similar. We can use the vocative form, which we'll look at later in this section. Kim, sing a song. Here, Kim is the person that the instruction is directed towards. We put that first followed by a comma. Or the causative, let her sing. Let is where you are saying something is allowed to happen, or you're asking someone to cause something else to come about. We can use something called a passive imperative. Be prepared. In a full sentence, this would be you should be prepared, or I am telling you to be prepared. But we could shorten it all into an imperative by using be as the infinitive and then prepared afterwards. It could be followed by an adjective. Be quiet. I want your situation to be quiet now. Now we're going to look at conjunctions and the basics of conjunctions in English. We're going to go quickly through the main rules. If you want to know more detail and get examples of all of the rules, why not try my full guide, and you can get a link to that in the video description to my YouTube video dedicated all to conjunctions. And here is a list of the coordinating conjunctions in English. For introduces causal reason, and connects or adds similar ideas, nor adds a negative clause, but introduces a contrast, or presents an alternative or a choice, yet shows contrast which might be surprising, and so gives a result or a consequence. Now let's look at subordinating conjunctions, and this goes into a lot more detail. So first of all, subordinating conjunctions of reason. Now let's quickly explain what a subordinating conjunction is. A subordinating conjunction joins an independent sentence and a dependent clause, which loses its intended meaning without being connected to the independent sentence. So if I say, you will learn all English grammar unless you finish this video early, then unless this video finishes early, that's a dependent clause, because if you separate it from the first sentence, it loses its meaning. If I just have unless you finish the video early, it's really meaningless without saying you will learn all of English grammar. But on the other hand, you will learn all of English grammar can be independent, because that can be a sentence on its own. So a subordinating conjunction introduces a dependent clause. The subordinating conjunction in the example I just gave is unless. But first of all, let's look at subordinating conjunctions of reason. So let's look at some of the examples below and study them. Since I was in a hurry, I was the first to leave the boat. So since gives the reason. I was in a hurry. That was the reason why I was the first to leave the boat. And here we see it can go at the start of the sentence with the first clause. Now, we can also move it to the end as well. I was the first to leave the boat since I was in a hurry. If it starts the first clause, put a comma before the second clause, but if it starts the second clause, some subordinators don't need a comma. The general rule is don't use the comma before the second, if it starts the second clause, unless it's really necessary to show that there's a difference between the two clauses, such as with contrast subordinators. Here are a list of subordinating conjunctions of reason. As explains the reason. Because is the same. In that, this explains a certain part of the clause, before or after. Inasmuch, this is a very formal conjunction meaning to this extent. Insofar is similar. Seeing as or seeing that, this shows that an action has been influenced by another. Since explains the reason, as we've just seen. And now on to subordinators of concession. Subordinators of concession introduce a clause that indicates there was an obstacle to the activity in the main clause, but the main clause was still able to take place. Let's look at some examples of subordinators of concession. Although, even though, granting or granted that, in spite of the fact that, notwithstanding, can be carried on as notwithstanding the fact that, regardless of the fact that, doesn't have to be included again. And then we have subordinators of condition. Subordinators of condition introduce a clause with a condition that must be fulfilled in order for the second clause to be fulfilled. And subordinators of condition are as long as, even if, except if, on condition that, provided, providing that, so long as, supposing that, unless, until, whether. All of these words will introduce a subordinating clause that gives the condition for the main clause. Now, subordinators of contrast. These are similar to subordinators of concession, but they do not contain the added meaning of surprise or hindrance to the main clause. So here it's just a straightforward contrast. One thing is different to another. With a subordinator of concession, one thing is true, but we might have been surprised by alternative information. Now let's look at the contrast subordinators. Rather than, whereas, when, while. Subordinators of purpose. These are similar to subordinators of reason, and they tell you what something is used for or why it is used. So there is a slight difference there to reason, but in practice, the end result is it's giving you the reason. Now, some of the prepositions here are based around prepositions, but have the effect of conjunctions in the way they link two clauses together. So they look like prepositions, but they work as conjunctions in this context. So this is words such as for fear that, in order that, in such a way that, so that. Lest is very old-fashioned. You might read this, but probably best not to use it in your own practice. And there are lots and lots of subordinators of time. These subordinators indicate a time-based relationship with the main clause. For example, past, present, or future. So if you use the subordinator of time, you're showing how the two clauses are connected in a time relationship. So if you use after, then you're saying something will be in the future compared to the main clause. As, the same time, as long as soon as, before means in the time past from the main clause, by the time that, up to this time, every time, so that's repeated, now that, present, once, so at this particular time something will become true, the moment that, similar to now that, the instant that, the exact time. We can also use till, until such a time as, when, whenever, while, and that's the subordinators of time. Moving on to subordinators of place then. So these subordinates introduce a clause with the place something happens. At the point where, we'll introduce information about the main clause telling us the place where something happens. At wherever, in whichever place, where, wherever. Subordinators of manner introduce a clause with why something is as it is. So, however. Now, however here is different to its contrast use. However can be what's called a conjunctive adverb that we'll come to a bit later. It's like a subordinator, but where two sentences are connected. This, however, is different. This, however, is talking about manner. I will come however I can. And this really means in any way that I can. So note this, it's a different use of however to how we normally see it. Other subordinators of manner, in the way that, in such a way that, in whatever way. Now, subordinators of result, and these introduce a clause with the outcome of the main clause. Now, relative pronouns such as which can appear to be conjunctions when they refer to an entire clause. So, with the consequence that, which in turn, so here which has that appearance of being a preposition. So, I tried my hardest in the race, which in turn meant that I won the race, for example. There are other phrasal subordinators too. We're going to look at a selection here, but we're going to go into this in more detail in the second part of this video later on. So look out for the part of the video, perhaps use the timestamps in the description below this video to find the later areas for conjunctions, where I'm going to look at more advanced conjunctions, which are more phrasal. But here's a selection. For time, phrasal subordinators are at the time that, just as. For comparison, as if, as though. For reason, in that, seeing that. On account of, in the light of. And for distance and quantity, to the extent that. And now let's move on to conjunctive adverbs. So these are similar to subordinators, but slightly different. Look at the example. She likes cities, however, her children don't. Notice that however doesn't connect the two sentences. It actually starts a second sentence, but it shows that there is a connection to the sentence before. So that's what conjunctive adverbs do. They show the connection between sentences. They don't actually connect the sentences together. And there are lots of these conjunctive adverbs. It's really important to know what is a subordinator and what's a conjunctive adverb so you can get the grammar right. Subordinators join the sentences together. Conjunctive adverbs keep the sentences separate. So just to clarify, they introduce or end a one-clause sentence and indicate the type of relationship between the two sentences. Let's start with conjunctive adverbs of addition then. These adverbs show that the new sentence is adding something relevant to the last sentence. And the conjunctive adverbs are additionally, also, as well as this or as well as that, besides, furthermore, further to this or further to that, in addition, moreover, not only that, to this end. And then we'll move on to conjunctive adverbs as intensifiers. Now, these are similar to addition, really, and they are used both to add to the previous point. So reading from here, they're used both to add to the previous point, but also to show that the new information will intensify the previous point in some way. So which conjunctive adverbs are intensifiers? Phrases such as above all the more, even more, indeed, in fact, not to mention, still more, undoubtedly. Conjunctive adverbs of result. Now, these indicate that the new sentence will explain the result or implication or outcome of the previous sentence. So use words such as accordingly, consequently, therefore, thus, hence, as a result, for this reason. Conjunctive adverbs of comparison. These adverbs indicate that the new sentence has some similarity to the ideas in the previous sentence. So along similar lines, by the same token, comparatively, correspondingly, in the same way, likewise, similarly, and to. But if you use to, bear in mind this always ends the sentence. And I should say at this point, in formal writing, it's acceptable to move the conjunctive adverb later in the sentence, sometimes in the middle and often at the end. So in the example I gave at the beginning, I like chips. Now, the example I gave was, I like chips, however, my friend likes fish. I could also have said, I like chips. My friend likes fish, however. So here, the conjunctive adverb goes at the end. Even if it goes at the end, it's still showing that the relationship between this one sentence and the one that came before. And to is different in that it always has to come at the end. I like fish. She likes chips too. But I couldn't say to. She likes chips. Now for conjunctive adverbs of contrast. These adverbs indicate that the new sentence will introduce an outcome that the previous sentence. It's a long video. I need a drink. If you're interested in a mug like this, let me know in the comments. So these adverbs indicate that the new sentence will introduce an outcome that the previous sentence may have suggested was not likely. So by contrast, conversely, however, in contrast, instead, nevertheless. Now this is a concession conjunctive adverb. Nonetheless is also a concession. Otherwise gives a hypothetical alternative. Rather, still. We have conjunctive adverbs of example. These introduce an example of the sentence before. Some of these are quite well known. For example, for instance, namely, specifically, and conjunctive adverbs of time. And again, there's many of these. These adverbs show how the new sentence progresses a story in relation to the previous sentence. So afterwards, earlier, eventually, finally, meanwhile, next, previously, simultaneously, subsequently, then. So these conjunctive adverbs are very common in storytelling. They help the storyteller progress time in a suitable way for the reader's benefit. Conjunctive adverbs of summary. Use adverbs of this type to introduce a summary of information that has come before in a text. So maybe you get to the end of a paragraph. You want to give one sentence that summarizes everything that came before. Use one of these words to introduce the summary. All in all, so there's words or phrases. All things considered, briefly, overall, in brief, in conclusion, in short, in summary, on the whole, to conclude, to summarize. And here are some other conjunctive adverbs that I couldn't put neatly into a category. Alternatively, well, this introduces another option. By the same token, this means the same way or reason as the sentence before. Equally, a point with the same value as the previous. In a similar manner is similar here. The next point has similarities to the previous. So again, this is a kind of similarity conjunctive adverb. In essence, this restates the key issue more simply. So you have a sentence that says everything in a complicated way, or a paragraph that says everything in a complicated way. If you say in essence, you're introducing the key bits. In other words, this introduces a clarification of what you've just said. In the same vein, well, this is likewise. On the flip side, this introduces an alternative idea or viewpoint, a bit like alternatively. And then we have something called paired conjunctions. Paired conjunctions involve two parts, and they develop a point in a certain direction across two clauses in a sentence. Look at the two people on the screen. They are twins. They look very similar. Let's have some examples that focus on them. Both and. These twins are both creative and highly competitive when they play games. So both one thing and another thing. So they are conjunctions that show that two things are connected here. Either or. The twins either play together or don't play at all. Again, either or, two alternatives in a sentence. Neither nor. Neither of the twins likes to clean their room, nor do they help with the dishes. Two things that are not true. Not only, but also. The twins are not only very close to each other, but also share the same interests. So this is an addition conjunction here. This thing is true, and the other thing is also true. And whether or. And this provides an alternative again. Whether it's a sunny day or raining outside, the twins always find a way to play together. Now let's look at negatives in English, and you can find out examples and deeper explanations of everything I'm going to say in my video guide, which you can get a link to in the video description below me. But now I'm going to quickly run through all of the rules you need to know about negatives in English. In this section of the video, we're looking at the basics of creating negatives in English. So I'm going to take you through the rules on this video. As with other parts of this mega video, I also direct you to other videos I've produced on YouTube where I go into all of these rules in more detail with examples. So if you are going through this section of the video and you think I want to know more, then go to the video description and find the link to the videos on negatives, which are linked there. But if you just want the basic rules, here we go. Negatives are usually formed through changing the auxiliary with a contraction or adding not. Adding not is considered more formal. With the verb to be, we can add not or contractions like this. I am not or I'm not. You are not, you're not. He, she or it is not, he isn't. We are not, we're not. They are not, they're not. And this is used when to be is the main verb, when it forms the continuous tense or for the passive form. 3 reasons why we're using to be, and we could do this negative thing or contractions with not or forming a negative in the ways shown here for the verb to be. Now, if we are talking about the past simple or continuous, then was not or wasn't, and were not and weren't. Now with the verb to do. I do not or I don't, you do not or you don't, not or she doesn't, we do not, we don't, they do not, they don't. So this is used when the main verb is not to be for the present or past tenses. If the main verb is not to be, then we use to do, apart from one exception I'll come to in a moment. For the past simple, did not or didn't. Now we can also use have, either with have got or with the past participle to form the perfect tenses. I have not, I haven't. You have not, you haven't. It has not, it hasn't. We have not, we haven't. They have not, they haven't. And this is used for perfect tenses, either present perfect or future perfect. But if we are talking about the past perfect, then it would be had not and hadn't for all of the different endings. Modals are formed differently because they are generally made negative by adding not after the modal, or you can sometimes create a contraction after the modal by adding n apostrophe t, like can't, mustn't, mightn't, couldn't. But there are some irregular forms. Shall becomes shan't for the contraction, and will becomes won't. With not, they're the same. Shall not, will not. But with the contractions, shan't and won't. Now for negative phrases. So these are phrases that create a negative in English using words other than no or not, or no or not in certain combinations. So negatives can be intensified through the following words and phrases. I don't like Mondays at all. At all makes don't bigger. You're really emphasizing the don't. Whatsoever, in the least, remotely, in the slightest, and not the least bit. All of these phrases emphasize the negative more. You can also use negatives to invert phrases, leading to a meaning that emphasizes the lack of something or surprise at something. Common ways to do this are through never have I. So instead of saying I have not been offended, if you want to emphasize that this is a huge degree and it's never happened in this way before, never have I been so offended. Little did I think he would say that. Little here emphasizes the lack. Never emphasizes the completeness of no. Little emphasizes the lack. Not ever did I expect that. So not again, 0 expectation. At no point did he seem nasty before. There was no situation in the past when we noticed this. No sooner did he speak than I left. So no sooner means instantly after. Not only did I complain, I also shouted. So this was not the only thing I did. A negative inversion created in all of these ways. Negative adverbs of frequency can be used to express how little something happens in terms of time, in terms of occurrences, regularity. I rarely ride a bicycle. I seldom ride a bicycle. I hardly ever ride a bicycle. All of these are negative adverbs of frequency. They're not nothing, but they're nearly nothing. Negative adverbs of quantity show the lack of something. It's barely worth starting this jigsaw. Scarcely, hardly. And this means there's almost no reason or almost no amount of worth here. Negatives can be softened with certain words. Instead of saying, I don't want to see anyone today, you could say, I don't really want to see anyone today, which means no, but not in a very strong way. We can also say, I'm not that keen on going out. I'm not very interested. I'm not entirely sure. So it's not a completeness. In fact, if you say I'm not entirely sure, you mean I'm close to entirely, but not totally. I'm not altogether is another one where you're saying you're nearly there, but not quite. I'm not necessarily staying. So I might be staying, but it's not guaranteed. We could create negatives when reporting information in the following ways. They recommended not travelling. So recommended is the reporting verb. They recommended not travelling. They suggested not to travel. So we can use the ing form or the to plus infinitive. Sometimes it depends on the verb you're using. They suggested to not travel. So here we've actually switched the order around, which is something we can do with negative reporting. And they insisted on not travelling. So this depends on the verb before. So insisted can be followed by on and then not travelling. And now negative phrases with participles. So participles can be made negative by starting a participle phrase with not, verb and ing. Not having any ideas, they asked an expert to help instead. So not having, not verb ing. Or having no ideas, verb ing no, they asked an expert to help instead. So here we have the verb with ing and no afterwards. And also we can have having not to take risks if we have the to plus infinitive as a verb afterwards. So having not to take risks. Not to infinitive, no ideas, no noun. Negative phrases can be used with no. No can be used in various ways to express a negative. Here are some phrases that no commonly appears in. He's no chef, but can cook chips. So here, describing someone as not being a chef. He's no chef. My cooking is no better than his. So here's a comparative. So basically, his is not above mine. He is by no means a bad cook. By no means that the next bit is not true. It means he's not a bad cook. He is in no way pretending to be a chef. So he is not pretending to be a chef. It will be no more than 10 minutes. There'll be no less than 5 food choices. Now for noun phrases. I'm going to give you the rules you need to know to use and create noun phrases in English. And again, I've got a special video that explains more, which you can click on and go to through a link in the video description. In this part of the video, we're looking at noun phrases in detail. Nouns can be one word, such as boat, or made of several words, where other words and phrases describe the main noun. One big boat in the sea. That should be described, not S there. Nouns with many words are called noun phrases. So let's look at noun phrases in more detail. Let's use this very long noun phrase to explain how noun phrases can be developed. All the three largest and most advanced boats in the Navy, which can carry 1,000 soldiers. Well, first of all, it's made up of determiners. All the three. So several determiners, and the determiners all go at the beginning of the noun phrase. If there are determiners, there don't have to be. You could just have the main noun, but you can have determiners, all the three boats. Then we have adjectives, largest and most advanced. Then the main noun, which here is just boats. You could have two nouns working together where one noun is the adjective, takes the adjective form for the main noun. Generally, we talk of main noun as just being one, but you could possibly have two nouns together in a compound noun. Then afterwards, we have preposition phrases. Here we have in the Navy, and then a relative clause, which can carry 1,000 sailors. And all of these 5 elements work together to create this very large noun phrase. Let's look in a bit more detail. Firstly, at the determiners, because remember there were 3 different determiners, all the 3. And this represents the 3 ways in which we can split determiners up in a noun phrase. Predeterminers, so all would be a quantifier, also adverb modifiers are possible, like almost. Then the main determiner, articles, so the, all the. Possessives and demonstratives can also be used as main determiners. And post-determiners, cardinals, ordinals, and quantifiers. So the cardinal here was 3, all the 3. Here are some examples of predeterminers that commonly come up in that position. All, both, half, double, and twice. All and both can be main determiners too. Some common main determiners are each, every, some, any, and no. And some common post determiners are many, several, and few. Now, I'm not saying these are all the words that can be main determiners or post determiners, but they're quite common. Whilst there always needs to be a main determiner, there does not need to be a predeterminer, there does not need to be a post-determiner, and there does not need to be either of them. It could just be the main determiner. So any combination is possible as long as you've got a main determiner. Next is a guide on used to in English. I'm going to quickly take you through all of the rules you need to know. Remember, of course, there's another video that explains more linked in the video description. Now we're going to look at the rules for used to. If you want more examples and more explanation, click on the link in the description to my longer video on used to. We employ the phrase used to when expressing something regular or routine in the past. It can be for a past state. For example, I used to be a pilot. That was my state. That was who I was. Or a past activity. I used to run 10 kilometers every day. Note that we don't use this for states that did not last a long time. For example, I used to go to the park last Sunday. No. It was a short state, limited just to one day. Don't use it for that reason. It needs to be something that was regular or routine over a period of time. The typical grammatical structure is subject used to infinitive or subject didn't used to plus infinitive. Careful because the D has disappeared from used here. Then moving on to get used to, which is a variation of used to. Get used to is different. It's not to do with a routine in the past. It means you become familiar with something. For example, the phrase get used to could be followed by a verb with ing. My brother will be getting used to going to school. Or a noun. My brother is getting used to coal mines. So coal mines is a place in the ground where you dig coal. The negative is formed through the auxiliary still. I didn't get used to. Be used to means you are familiar with something. This phrase can be followed again by a verb with ing. My brother was used to going to school. That was in the past. And a noun. My brother was used to coal mine. So talking about being used to, they were familiar in that time in the past. It had already happened. The negative again formed through the auxiliary. I am not used to. Notice we keep the D with get used to and be used to. Now on to how we use tenses with used to, because there are some changes here. Used to on its own is only used in the past. Get used to can be used with a variety of tenses, but not usually with the present simple because it doesn't really fit. It describes a process that's happening, and the present simple, of course, is for things that are established and true and permanent. Be used to can be used with any simple tense. Here are some variations when we're using modal verbs. We often say can't get used to if we feel unable to become familiar with something in the present. Can get used to is used to predict future ability to become familiar with something. Use must get used to if there is a need to become familiar with something. I must get used to English grammar. There is a need to get used to it. Have to get used to is similar, but must tends to be a personal requirement, whilst have to tends to be an external requirement. If you say I have to get used to it, it's because someone else makes you. If you say I must get used to it, it might be that someone else has told you to do it, but it does mean that you are speaking about the rule over yourself. Used to can be intensified with intensifying adjectives. For example, I'm completely used to the cold now. I have lived through 10 British winters. So completely intensifies used to. We rarely use this phrase with a gradable adjective. We could potentially say I'm very used to the cold now. I'm rather used. I'm slightly used to. You'd probably use it more with the stronger gradable adjectives. So I'm really used to, I'm very used to, but not I'm slightly used to or I'm a little bit used to. Get used to can be modified with process adverbs. I wasn't used to cold winters at first, but I eventually got used to them. So eventually it gives the process and modifies got used to. Become can be used as an alternative to get used to and emphasizes a gradual process over time. So in the example above, I eventually became used to them. Get used to can be inverted with the word only as well. Only after years of living in the north of England, it should be north of England, not English here, did I get used to the cold. About pronouns. Again, if you want more detail or more examples, click on the link to my longer video on pronouns. But here's a quick guide. Pronouns replace nouns. They are usually used to refer to a noun previously mentioned in a sentence. We have subject, object, possessive pronouns, which are determiners and non-determiners. So all these different types of pronouns. There are still more as well. Relative pronouns we'll come to later. Reflexive pronouns we looked at earlier on the section on reflexives. So subject pronouns replace a noun in the subject position in the sentence. Object pronouns, a noun in the object position. Possessive pronouns that are determiners indicate ownership. And possessive pronouns, which are non-determiners, not only indicate ownership, but they replace the noun. So what are these pronouns? So subject pronouns are I, you, she, he, it, one, we, they. Object pronouns, me, you, her, him, it, one, us, them. Possessive pronouns, which are determiners, my, your, her, his, its, one's, our, their, and the non-determiners, mine, yours, hers, his, ours, theirs. What's the difference between the possessive pronouns? Determiners, it's my pen. So my is a determiner for the pen. But if I say it's mine, I don't say the word pen. It's a non-determiner. Mine simply is the pronoun on its own. It's my pen, it's mine. It's your pen, it's yours, and so on. Here are a few things to bear in mind with pronouns. Use he or she for people. Use it for other things. However, he or she is sometimes used for animals and even objects where a meaningful relationship or affection exists, for example, with a pet. One and ones is rarely used. It is considered very formal and it is associated with royalty. If you don't know whether to use he or she, then them, they, them, or their is often acceptable as an alternative. And as I said, we have relative pronouns as well. So this is where we use a question word to introduce more information about a noun. The pronoun replaces the noun that's being described. So who for a subject or object for person or people. So The person who watches this video. Who replaces the person to introduce a relative clause that describes the noun person. Whom is the object for a person or people. This is considered more formal. Notice whom is not used as a subject replacement. Whose is a possessive. Which refers to a noun or to a clause, and that can replace who and which in some situations. You're going to learn about articles in English. Articles are really complex, so it's important that you learn them well. And after you've watched this guide, watch my longer video to learn much more about it. Let's start with articles and a or an. The basic rules are that we use a or an before a singular noun when it's one of many. When we're not focusing on a specific example of the noun, it's the first time you've mentioned it, and you can count the noun. 1 apple, 2 apples, 3 apples. If you can count it and it's 1 apple only, then you can say an apple. Now, why did I use an? Well, goes before words starting with consonant sounds, but an goes before words starting with a vowel sound. So an apple, a banana. Now for the rules with the. We use the when a noun is unique in some way, like the moon. There's only one of them. You're focusing on a specific example of the noun. You've mentioned it before in the same context. Usually this is true. We'll see an exception in a moment. And we could use the before a noun for countable or uncountable nouns. It doesn't matter whether you can count them or not. You can still use the if those rules apply. Now for the zero article, we use no article at all before a noun when we're looking at one plural noun out of many and we're not focusing on a specific example of the noun. In that case, we would use the. And again, when it's the first time you've mentioned this plural noun and the noun cannot be counted. So if we have water, for example, you can't count that. Don't put an article in front. Don't put a or a in front of it. Put zero article. Now, let's look at more advanced rules. A or an can be used after copular verbs, like the verb to be, when mentioned for a second time. This is an exception. Usually, if you mention a noun a second time, you've got to switch to the. But you don't have to if it comes after a copular verb when it's the second mention. For example, it was, I have an apple. It is a nice apple. Second mention, copular verb. I could still use a or an. Before a group noun, if other rules for using a or an are fulfilled, use a or an again. Or when introducing an example to represent all types of that noun. For example, a monkey is a type of animal. Although we will see that you can use articles quite flexibly when it comes to an example representing all types. Now, the at a more advanced level can be used before a group noun if other rules for using the are fulfilled. When specifying a noun to make it unique, for example, you add an adjective to show that you mean only one particular type of the noun, the one that's got the quality of the adjective. With superlatives, we use the. And with the zero article, if you have topic nouns in a general sense, so something like history, don't put an article in front of it, or abstract nouns that are not usually counted, like knowledge, you wouldn't put the article in front of that. And to say what a plural noun is usually like. For example, monkeys like eating bananas, which is a bit like the example we saw before with a and an, showing the flexibility. Now for some more specific rules. With countries that are real words, like the United Kingdom, plurals like the Netherlands, or island groups like the Philippines, use the, otherwise you don't. Rivers and oceans, so the River Thames, the Atlantic Ocean. Mountain ranges, deserts and forests use the in front of, like the Himalayas. North, south, east and west when they are nouns meaning in that area. So for example, it's in the north, but we'll come to an exception in a moment to that. Most nouns for specific places, for example, the shops. Common transport types when they're specified, so the bus, the train, but when they are specified, because there's going to be a difference in a moment I'm going to come to, where we use the zero article. So most countries use zero article: France, Spain, Switzerland. Lakes and waterfalls. Niagara Falls, for example, is a waterfall, no article in front of it. Individual mountains, so it's not the Mount Everest, it's just Mount Everest. Now, here's the exception with north, south, east, and west. When you're describing another noun, don't use the article. So not in the North Dakota, but just in North Dakota. And some commonplaces don't take articles in front of them when you're describing, when you're focused more on the activity that happens there. So, for example, if you say, I'm going to school, it means you're going to a place where you're going to learn. If you say you're going to the school, then you're more interested in the building. And here's the exception with the transport. After by, don't use the. That's the exception to the rule we looked at a moment ago. Adjectives in English have all kinds of rules. I'm going to take you through the really important rules now. And if you want to know more, go to the video that is all about adjectives, which you can join through clicking in the link in the video description. Okay, let's move on to adjectives and advanced adjective rules. Now, we know that adjectives normally go before a noun, but sometimes you can say the followed by an adjective with no noun. For example, hate the bad, love the good. The good, the bad, they're adjectives. This means all of the adjective, all good, all bad. Now, country adjectives can often come before nouns after the by adding an S, but countries ending SH, CH, or ESE do not need this extra S. So, for example, the Chinese, ESE, don't add the extra S, but with other country adjectives, they become nouns. For example, Italian becomes Italians. When it's obvious which noun is being described by an adjective, we can leave the noun out completely in some situations. Moving on, with certain words, we can place the adjective before the article: as, how, so, to, that. And you can end sentences with adjectives in some situations. For example, in poetry and songs, the rules get changed because we have something called poetic license. People put words in different places for musical effects rather than language effects. But more grammatically correctly, after something, for example, I want to eat something hot. After everything, anything, somebody or someone, with some measurements, and with this combination, verb, object, adjective, the adjective can end the sentence. So it doesn't always go before the noun. You can leave which plus to be in order to leave an adjective on its own at the end of a sentence. So I went somewhere which is nice. I could have just said I went somewhere nice. Although it is possible to omit who were before the adjective, this is uncommon. Some adjectives start with a, followed by a word which was separate before. So, for example, afraid. So, afraid is linked in historical English to fear. This changes when it moves to come before the noun. So, I am afraid. So, afraid is not before the noun, but you wouldn't say the afraid boy. You'd say the frightened boy. Frightened before the noun. Adjectives often come after copular verbs in the same way that I've just mentioned, and these are sometimes called a subject complement. They describe the word, the noun that comes before the verb in this case. In the complement position, intensifying adjectives go before their noun but not after. For example, there was a total misunderstanding. So total needs to go before misunderstanding in this situation. When there are multiple adjectives, follow this order. First of all, so I'm going to go through a list here where the noun always comes after the adjectives, but these words of adjectives, if there's more than one, come before in this order. Opinion, then size, physical quality, age, shape, colour, origin, material, and purpose. When choosing between ed or ing for a feeling or Or for opinion adjectives, bear in mind the following. Adjective plus ed means something else makes the subject feel this way. I am interested means something makes me feel interested. But adjective plus ing, the subject makes someone else feel this way. I am interesting, this means that I make someone else interested. Most adjectives ending ed do not have a vowel sound, but when they follow T or D, a vowel sound is necessary. Now let's look at comparatives and superlatives. For one-syllable comparatives, we usually just add ER, but there are some exceptions. Two syllables or more, usually more, followed by the adjective. If the adjective ends in Y, then it becomes IER if it's a one-syllable adjective. Also with some multi-syllable adjectives too. E in a one-syllable comparative end with ER, don't add another E. There are some irregular forms too. Little becomes less, good better, bad becomes worse, much becomes more, far becomes further or farther. Now let's look at the superlatives. For one-syllable superlatives, usually you just add EST to the end of the adjective. For two syllables or more, most, followed by the adjective. Y becomes IEST in this case. E becomes EST, don't add the extra E. And irregular forms, little becomes least, good becomes best, bad becomes worst, much becomes most, and far becomes farthest or furthest. Now, other rules for adjectives. Now for some other ways of creating comparison. For equal comparison, I am as tall as you. As, adjective, as. For negative comparison, I am not as tall as you. Not before the as. If you use not followed by the comparative, this can mean either as, or not as. So I am not taller than you. This can mean that your height is less, or it can mean it's the same too. Adverbs are often formed by adding ly to an adjective. So careful, carefully, add ly. But some adjectives also end ly, so be a bit careful. Lovely is actually an adjective, not an adverb. A number of adjectives and adverbs take the same form. So these are irregular: fast, slow, early, late, low, high, hard, and then imperatives. Moving on to the imperatives. These can involve verb plus adjective as a full sentence on its own. Be good, nothing else needed. It's just an instruction to have these qualities. It means you must or you should be a good person. Informally, exclamatory sentences can consist of just an adjective and a pronoun. Oh, you won the lottery, lucky you. Lucky, the adjective, you referring to yourself. Adjectives that come after copular verbs can be followed by a preposition phrase. For example, the convertible car is open at the top. And adjectives that come after copular verbs could be explained by a to phrase. For example, the theatre is open to visit. Another way is with a that clause. It is important that people listen to the instructions. Now for adverbs. What are they? How do we use them? Where do we put them in sentences? You're going to find out everything you need to know. And remember then to go and watch the video which is dedicated to adverbs, which I've linked in the video description. But here come the basic rules. Now we're going to move on to adverbs. Adverbs can go in different positions in sentences. I'm going to call them front, mid, and end. Front is where the adverb comes before the subject and the verb. Mid is where it's between the subject and the verb. And end is where it comes after the subject and verb. So that's how I'm going to categorize them. For the mid position, adverbs often always come after auxiliaries but before the main verb. So I have often come here. Although adverbs usually follow to be in the past and the present, informally the adverb can go before to be to emphasize the verb. So I am always right. I always am right. Here you're emphasizing the verb, but we don't usually do that. Adverbs usually can't go between the verb and the object, or between two verbs together. So I bought a car happily is fine because happily's at the end, but not I bought happily a car. Adverbs of degree. These tell how much an adjective, adverb, or verb is. For example, it was too hot to go outside. So here, too is telling us the amount of heat. Let's look at some other common adverbs and the positions they go in. So just comes either in the mid position or at the start before the subject. To comes before a determiner or an adjective. Enough can come at the end or before the noun it describes. Really usually comes before the word it modifies, although there are some exceptions to that, which we'll look at in a moment. Really can express doubt in a one-word question informally. Basically, this means you just answer with the word really. Is that true? It just expresses doubt. And here's that exception. When really means in actual fact, it goes at the front. Now on to adverbs of frequency. Where did they go in a sentence? What are adverbs of frequency? Well, they tell how often a word happens. They usually take the mid position, such as here. I sometimes travel to the coast at weekends. Subject, adverb of frequency, and then verb. Informally, they can come at the end. I travel to the coast at the weekends sometimes. This would be for general frequency, not extreme frequency. Now on to adverbs of place. These can come directly after the word they are describing. For example, the crowd outside was growing. So here we have the crowd is being described by outside. Some placement words, for example, outside, can go in the front position too. Not all of them, but some. So outside, the crowd was growing is also absolutely fine. Now, adverbs of manner. These tell how something happens, and they can go in the front, mid, and end positions. They're pretty flexible. Adverbs of time usually go in the front or end positions. For example, lately I felt unwell. I've felt unwell lately, but not I've lately felt unwell. They can sometimes come after the noun they describe. For example, the police soon arrived at the scene, but not all of them. Adverbs of duration usually come at the end, unless the adverb is the key information in the sentence. For example, later, the crowd disappeared. So later comes at the start here. It's the key bit. When there are several adverbs together, follow this order: manner, place, time. For example, you need to play brilliantly out there today. Brilliantly is the manner, out there is the place, and today is the time. Adverbs usually follow modals when there is a modal. For example, you must always wash your hands before eating. But that can change when you are intensifying the modal. And here we come back to really. You really must wash your hands. Adverbs of certainty, for example, possibly and perhaps, well, words ending ly commonly but not exclusively take the mid position. Other modals of certainty are more likely at the front or the end. Adverbs of completeness, words such as entirely, usually take the mid position. For emphasis, they could be placed at the end. Now for adverbs that can have two different meanings. Quite, when it means somewhat or fairly, it usually goes before the whole noun phrase. But when it means totally, it comes before the adjective. Rather, it normally goes before the adjective, but in storytelling, it is sometimes placed before the article. Already goes in the mid or end position, and yet, as an adverb, usually goes at the end, but as a conjunction, it usually goes at the front of the clause when it's linking two clauses together. Still, as an adverb, is usually in the mid position, but in negatives before the verb phrase, except for the verb to be. Even or only usually goes in the mid position unless referring to the subject, in which case it goes in the front. Now some words that are commonly confused. Hardly, well, this means not many, not much, or not long. Hard means high effort required, solid or strong. Late or lately. Late means after the expected time, but lately means in recent time before now. Most means the top one, mostly the majority. Subtle difference. Wide means a big space, but widely means across a large area or number of people. Now we're going to learn about clauses and sentences, focusing more on the compound and complex sentences. What are they? Watch to find out. And now let's move on to clauses and sentences. Now we've looked at this in an earlier part of the video. Here are some extra things to bear in mind. The simplest sentences follow these patterns: subject, verb, object, subject, verb, complement, subject, verb, adverbial, or sometimes just subject, verb. I ran. We could join sentences through coordinators. That's where we turn them into clauses. Once you join two sentences together, those sentences are now called clauses. And we could do it simply through coordinators like this: subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object. For example, Rachel likes Chinese food, but Tom hates it. We could create lists like this: Rachel likes Chinese food, Tom likes pizza, and Jeff likes burgers. SVO, SVO, SVO. Here's another variation after that. We could also have subject, verb, object, subject, then verb, object, and even subject, verb, object, object. And this is where we have mirroring, where we assume that a certain word applies to the second clause, even though we don't mention it. For example, Rachel likes Chinese food but hates ice cream. Rachel is omitted in the second clause, but we know it still refers to her. Or even Rachel likes Chinese food and burgers. Well, we know it's Rachel likes burgers too. It's just omitted. So for mirroring, the original grammar must have symmetry. The structures are mirrored in both of the final two examples with Rachel we've seen here, so we don't need to repeat them. On to looking more at simple sentences that are connected, 661. When one simple sentence is connected to another simple sentence, it is sometimes possible to join them together with a subordinator. So Rachel eats food. Rachel doesn't like Chinese food at the weekend. Well, this could become Rachel eats Chinese food unless it is the weekend. It is the weekend now becomes a subordinating clause. It loses its meaning if it is not attached to the main clause, because we're only really interested in the weekend in the context of Rachel eating Chinese food. There are a number of ways that we can make sentences more complex through subordinators. Unless it is the weekend, Rachel eats Chinese food. So here we have unless as the subordinator. In the next one, we have a relative clause in the middle. Rachel, who likes Chinese food, has a Chinese friend. Or we can turn it around so that the subordinating clause, which is a relative clause, comes at the end. Rachel has a Chinese friend who likes Chinese food. The cafe where Rachel eats Chinese food serves excellent coffee. So here we have the inserted clause in the middle, the cafe where Rachel eats food, and this together creates a noun phrase with a clause in the middle. The cafe. Well, what is it about the cafe that's special? Where Rachel eats Chinese food. So where Rachel eats Chinese food combines with the cafe to make one noun phrase. And finally, Rachel's friend enjoys the cafe where Rachel eats Chinese food. The same sentence, but here you can see the noun phrase now comes at the end. So all these different options for creating sentences from parts of clauses. We can combine these three sentences below with a coordinator and a subordinator. Rachel eats Chinese food. Rachel drinks cola. Rachel doesn't like Chinese food or cola at the weekend. So adding a coordinator and subordinator could produce the following. Rachel eats Chinese food and drinks cola unless it is the weekend. Now, why is this significant? It's because this is called a compound complex sentence. We have three clauses and we have a compound element. Those are the bits joined by and then we have the complex element, unless it is the weekend. What's the difference between the compound part and the complex part? Well, we'll look at this more later on. But the compound part uses a coordinator that joins two clauses of equal value. Chinese food, drinks cola, equal value. But the subordinating part is not equal to the rest of the sentence. It only exists if it's connected to the bit before. So unless it is the weekend, has to be connected to the other part. Chinese food and drinks cola does not. When we use a relative pronoun followed by the subject, the relative pronoun can be omitted if the object of the relative clause is the same as the word that the clause defines. What do we mean here? Look at the examples. The cafe that Rachel likes to visit serves excellent drinks. Well, the relative pronoun is the same as the object here. So the cafe that refers to the cafe. So we could delete it. The cafe Rachel likes to visit serves excellent drinks. When we use a relative pronoun followed by to be, we can omit both of these words when they are followed by a participle and something else. So look at the examples here. The cafe, which is opening next door, can become simply the cafe opening next door. Or the cafe which is visited can become the cafe visited. Now we're moving on to adverb clauses, a particular type of clause. Adverb clauses refer to a verb or a sentence and tell us how, why, where, when, to what degree, under which conditions. For example, because she ran so fast, she won a medal. And because she ran so fast is an example of an adverb clause telling us how. Positives are described here. When the subject can be described by two things, the less important information can be inserted as a noun phrase within commas immediately after the subject. For instance, the sentences here. Rachel is looking for a new apartment. Rachel is a student from Greece. Two sentences, but I can combine them to include an appositive like this. Rachel, a student from Greece, is looking for a new apartment. So here I've shortened the sentence, Rachel is a student from Greece, and I've kind of inserted it as extra information describing Rachel. Now, here are some rules or guidance for what happens in a particular text that you're writing. So if you're trying to write a chronological or narrative text, that's a story basically. You progress a story in time. You use the past continuous or past perfect to add background and use a lot of linking words. This is the type of grammar we expect you to use in this type of writing. In an expository text, you're explaining something, so you often use the present tenses, and it's a good idea to use a topic sentence at the beginning of a paragraph. That's one individual sentence that previews the rest of the paragraph. Or the paragraph could consist entirely of cause and effect. One thing leads to another, one thing leads to another, and so on. If you're writing a descriptive text, then this is not the kind of text that progresses a story. You're focusing on one thing and describing it in detail. So use a lot of state verbs, because state verbs don't progress anything. They're not active. They simply focus on the thing you're looking at or thinking about. Logical progression makes more sense here in this type of text. And keep the key ideas central. Don't move from one idea to the next quickly. You want to have one idea that you focus on and describe a lot. In an argument or persuasive text, you tell us what may be true. That's the aim of the text. You're aiming to try and tell us what may be true. The present tense is good for this because the present tense establishes truth and fact. If we think of the rules for the present simple, what's the main rule? To give truths. A really advanced feature of English is cleft sentences. Yes, I had a haircut between filming the bit you've just seen and now. We can use the definite article in a cleft sentence to add emphasis to a particular part. So let's think about this sentence. I stole some sweets from the cupboard, but I'm pretending I didn't. Now, I want to emphasize that I'm telling the truth here. So I add a cleft sentence at the beginning that brings emphasis to a particular issue, which is this is the truth. So look at what I do here. The truth is that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. So the cleft sentence is made because I have this part here. The truth is that. The truth is that it's not the main part of the sentence, but it's just an extra thing we put at the beginning to bring emphasis to the fact that this is, I'm claiming it to be true. The truth is that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. And what have we done here? We've used the definite article to start it. So that's one way that we can create this cleft sentence, which is simply an insertion at the beginning that brings emphasis to a particular part of the sentence. We can also use a WH word to create a cleft. We looked at this at the very beginning of the video in questions. What happened is that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. So I'm focusing on this is the happening. Also there is truth in the story that I stole some sweets from the cupboard, and it is true that I stole some sweets from the cupboard. So these are different ways that we can create this cleft sentence. We're going to have a good look at conditionals in English. I'm going to share the rules and examples of each of the rules here. Now let's look at conditionals in English. Conditionals are types of sentences often using if that show that one condition needs to be fulfilled before a certain outcome can take place. So let's look at the first example on the screen here. If they arrive for the lecture early, they will get a seat near the front. So there is a condition to the second part. They want to get a seat near the front, but there's a condition. Arrive for the lecture early. Arriving early must be fulfilled in order for the second part to happen. Now, this is called the first conditional, where we have if followed by a present simple clause, followed by a clause with will. And this looks at a general condition that's either in the present or in the future. And this is the most common first conditional structure. But there are lots of exceptions and different rules if you want to use if at an advanced level. Let's look through them quickly. If with a present simple clause followed by then makes it clearer that one thing depends on another. So adding then here, if they arrive early for the lecture early, then they will get a seat near the front. It brings extra emphasis to the fact that the two things, that one thing depends on the other. Now, sometimes you can add will in the if clause. We don't usually do this, and most grammar books will tell you not to do it, but there are some reasons why you can. It is used where the condition in the if clause is a result of the second clause. If you will benefit from my assistance, I will help you with your work. So my condition is that helping you with your work, well, that will lead to you being benefited. So if those two things are fulfilled, then I will do it. And in this case, I can use will in the if clause. It's quite rare, but it can happen. A couple of other reasons you can use will in the if clause. If you will sign the register, we will let you join the class. And this is simply making it more polite, a polite request. Or if will is used to show a condition that comes from someone's insistence in performing an action. If he will keep playing those drums loudly, we will all go deaf. So will is showing an insistence. It's kind of like an annoyance here. Now on to other if clauses. Sometimes we can use might or could instead of will. And this introduces a possible consequence of the if clause. If we run as fast as possible, we might catch the train. It's a possibility, not a certainty. What about with must? Well, this introduces a consequence of the if clause. If you want to catch the train, you must arrive on time. So you must arrive on time. That is needed in order for the first part to be true, in order for the consequence to happen, in order for there to be a consequence of catching the train. Now, with can, fulfilling the condition leads to ability or a possibility becoming available. If we buy tickets for the sleeper carriage, we can sleep on the train. So now the possibility becomes available. We can. What about should? This introduces a consequence in the form of advice. If you want to get a seat on the train, you should travel at quiet times. Notice the order has gone backwards with must and should here. You should travel at quiet times in order to get the seat on the train. So the condition's actually gone the opposite way here with should and must. Doesn't always, but in these instances, that's what's happened. You could also use a past simple clause before will. If the factory didn't use high quality materials when making your shirt, it will wear out quickly. What's happened here? Well, it's a past situation describing a likely future consequence. So we're not sure about this. We're being hypothetical about something that happened in the past we don't actually know about. Did they use high quality materials? We don't know. But if they did, then this will be the consequence. Sometimes we can use going to instead of will. And this introduces a pre-planned consequence. If the materials arrive on time, I'm going to make socks tomorrow. Should is often used in the if clause. If we have if subject should clause, if subject clause with should, then an imperative clause such as if you should find the buttons, tell me so I can repair my coat. This is used when something probably won't happen, but you state the condition in case it does. We don't expect to find the buttons, but if you should do this. And there are variations on this structure using happen to. If you happen to find the buttons, tell me. If you should happen to find the buttons, tell me. Now, sometimes we can omit the subject and the verb to be. And this could be used when giving very formal or official instructions. If told to leave, do so immediately. So we've missed out. If you are told to leave, then you should do this immediately. We've reduced it completely. We've missed out will. We've missed out if you are. When can usually be used instead of if in all of the sentences I've shown before, but we need to read about the difference between when and if in the section on zero conditionals, which we're coming to next. So when told to leave, do so immediately. So what are the slight differences between if and when? Well, let's come to these now. This is the zero conditional. The zero conditional is not used for single instances of a condition leading to a consequence. Rather, it is used for conditions that always lead to consequences in the same way every time. And that's the key thing. If something happens in the same way every time, then do the following. Either if, followed by a present simple clause and another present simple clause, or when, followed by a present simple clause and another present simple clause. There's a lot to read on the screen here, so I recommend that you download the PDF that goes with this lesson so you can read in your own time. But very quickly, if you have things that will possibly happen and always lead to the same consequence if they do, use if. If the weather turns cold, people don't go out in this town. But if things will definitely happen and always lead to the same consequence, then use when. When autumn arrives, the leaves on many trees turn brown. When autumn will definitely happen. The weather will not always turn cold. So that's the difference between if and when here. Now, you can use when followed by a range of modals for different meanings. The key difference is that a when clause represents something that is guaranteed to happen. When you get home, you must keep quiet. When you get home, I might be asleep. What's guaranteed to happen? Getting home. By saying when I get home, I mean it's certain. Now, again, you can use if with the past simple, but also with would in the second clause. And this is called the second conditional. What's the second conditional? This is where something is hypothetical. It's an unreal situation. If I earned a lot of money, I would buy a bigger car. Now, I don't have a lot of money, so this is unreal for me. And to show it's unreal, I use the past simple with would. Here are some variations. If I were rich, I would choose to buy a fast car. So normally it would be I was, and he, she, or it was. But with if, we use this subjunctive were. We can also use a past simple clause followed by a question. And this means if something is true, I have a related question. For example, if you were in my city last week, why didn't you visit me? Why didn't you visit me is the related question. We can use would in the if clause to be For more informal conversational English, particularly in America, if you would earn a lot of money, would you buy a bigger car? Now, looking at the second conditional with modals, we can use should in the second clause to represent advice based on a hypothetical situation. If you were paid $10,000 to do a parachute jump, you should do it. Or we can use might for possible actions based on a hypothetical situation. If I were paid $20,000 to jump out of a plane, I might do it. Would you? We could have will in the second clause. If you would let me do a parachute jump, I will donate to charity. Now, this is quite different to the typical second condition. Here, we're making a polite request with a promise of what happens if the request is granted. And we can also use were to after if. If you were to jump out of a plane, your parents would be terrified. And were to makes it clear we're talking about something in the future. We can invert if and would to make it a polite question or explore a possibility. Would it be okay if I changed my mind about the parachute jump? Now, but for introduces the only reason why a situation did not happen. But for the storms, we would have jumped out of a plane today. There's only one reason that stopped us, the storms. And if it wasn't for, it's similar to but for, and it's often used to introduce something that saved a situation from a bad consequence. For example, if it wasn't for John, I would never have fulfilled my ambitions. John saved us from a bad consequence. John was the reason why I could fulfill my ambitions. Now let's move on to the third conditional. Let's look at the first example. If I had studied harder, I would have passed my exams. This is hypothetical about the past. We're thinking about something that happened in the past and an alternative to reality if there'd been a difference in the past. So if I had studied harder, I would have passed my exams. Did they pass their exams? No. So it's not a real situation in the past. We're thinking about an alternative to the past. So this is the most common third conditional structure: if, past perfect clause, clause with would have and past participle. Now for the variations. It can also refer to a present or future context if the consequence if the context allows. If I had studied harder, I would have reached a higher level. So we're talking about past action affecting how things are now. Also, in the next point, a present or future consequence can be introduced with this structure: if, past perfect clause, clause with would be. If I had studied harder, I would be studying at a higher level. So that could mean studying now, or perhaps having plans to. If you use could have with a past participle, this introduces a possible consequence that may have existed if a certain situation had been different in the past. If I had revised every day, I could have passed my exams. And we can use short forms of if, such as if anything followed by a clause, which is, so here, if anything is an adverbial, and it means if there is any possibility of the previous thing being true, then this should happen instead. I don't think I should invite her to dinner. If anything, she should invite me. So if there's any possibility of an invitation happening, it should be like this. If so links a consequence back to a condition in the previous sentence. Why don't you see if you can get some time off next week? If so, we can accept your mother's invitation. So the consequence will come if the question can be answered positively. If not is the opposite. It's the consequence of a condition not being fulfilled. So if not, ask for a day off at the weekend. So if there's a negative response to the question, do this instead. The structure, if not, can also introduce an intensification. Often, if not always. So if not always makes it even more intense. Not just often, but even more than often. Inversion is something that we can use at an advanced level with conditionals. Were I to spend time with my son, I would play games with him. So this is an alternative to if I were to. In the third conditional, we can invert by using had I instead of if I had. Had I spent more time with my son, which is inverted version of if I had. And in the first conditional, we can use should instead of if in the first clause. Should there be no school today, I will take my son to the park. If only is where we have a wish or desire for something to be different. We looked at wishes earlier in the video. If only works in a similar way, where the tenses don't quite work in the way you expect. If only the weather were better. That's a desire for something to be different in the present, but we use the past tense to describe it. For the future, we use would. If only it would stop raining, which means from now onwards into the future. And the past perfect looks back to the past. If only it had been a sunny day yesterday, what we mean is before now. We can replace if with a number of different words. Supposing often leads to a question. Supposing the delivery of food for the lunch is late, how will we feed all of our guests? Imagine can turn an if clause into an independent sentence. Look at the difference here. Imagine if everyone had enough food. Full stop. All charities would close. Now, if it was if on its own, we'd have to join the two clauses with a comma. But with imagine, we could separate the two clauses. It can also introduce a hypothetical situation without if at all. Imagine life in an igloo. Provided that or providing. This introduces a unique condition for the consequential clause. Provided that the food has been cooked thoroughly, it will be safe. On condition that, this means the second clause can only be fulfilled after the first condition is also fulfilled. On condition that you get qualified, you can work as the cook. So long as is similar. So long as you get qualified. And what if introduces a one-sentence hypothetical question about a condition? What if the food doesn't arrive? What would we do next? And here are some final points on conditionals if you want to take it to a really advanced level. We can use an imperative clause before an if or when clause. For example, answer him if he speaks. Ask him if he will come to dinner. Listen to him when he speaks. If I were you is an interesting phrase because it uses the second conditional, but really it's used to give advice. It's like should. If I were you, I would listen to the speaker. What I really mean is you should. It makes it less direct, but we're not being hypothetical. We're simply being more polite in the way we say you should. However, if I were you can be omitted if the context of the second clause is clear, and instead we can use subject and should instead. I don't know the answer. You should listen to the lecturer. He'll give you the right answer. But the if I were you makes it more polite. Unless can introduce a conditional meaning except if. Unless you listen to the speaker, you won't know the answer. This really means you won't know the answer except if you listen. And even if introduces a conditional with the sense that doing something won't enable the condition to be fulfilled. Even if you read all the books, you won't learn what the lecturer can tell you. Now we're going to look at conjunctive adverbs that are more advanced. We looked at the basic level ones earlier. Now we're going to take it up a level. Now we're going to look at more advanced conjunctive adverbs. First of all, we're looking at adverbs of similarity. Now, earlier in the video, we looked at one word or simple conjunctive adverbs. Now we're just going to focus on the more advanced ones. There is a little bit of overlap between the two sections of the video, but this section particularly focuses on the advanced ones and introduces a lot of new ones we didn't cover earlier. So a reminder that a conjunctive adverb connects two sentences together and shows how they are connected. So taking the first example, summer in Europe is hot. Likewise, summer in Africa is even hotter. Likewise shows the connection between the two sentences. Now, likewise could have gone at the end of the sentence too. So conjunctive adverbs of similarity can be likewise, similarly, in the same way, in a similar manner. Also, in the same vein, equally, by the same token. Now for conjunctive adverbs of contrast. in contrast to or in contrast with, on the other hand, nevertheless, however, by contrast, conversely, on the flip side. All of these introduce a contrast between two sentences. If you download the PDF, you can see all of these examples and you can read them in your own time. Because this is such a long video, in the video itself, I'm simply going to go through the words that you use. And please do pause the video or read the PDF if you want to study the examples more closely. With conjunctive adverbs of result, therefore, hence, accordingly, correspondingly, on that account, consequently. Conjunctive adverbs of restating, in other words, to reiterate, to put it another way, in essence, in simpler terms. Now for a look at coordinators in English. Coordinators are words that join two simple sentences. We looked at these earlier in the video, but a reminder of what those are. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. How are these different to conjunctive adverbs? Well, they're different because they connect two independent sentences with a comma, so they're in the same sentence. Look at the last example. The buses weren't running anymore, so he continued until the morning. We have two independent sentences. The buses weren't running anymore. He continued until the morning, and we've joined it with so. However, we could use some advanced alternatives that have a similar purpose. Along with introduces an accompanying item. He went to work on the building site along with his colleague. Notice it's introducing a noun here rather than a clause, but it has a similar effect. Combined with, sand combined with water made cement for the bricks. So sand, it's not just sand and water, we're talking about two things that act as one. Together with, the manager called me together with another worker for a meeting. Two items that occur concurrently at the same time. In addition to simply introduces an extra item. We are provided with new tools in addition to the ones we had. Remember, in addition on its own could be a conjunctive adverb. In addition to can be a way of connecting two items, and it functions a little bit like a coordinator would. We're going to learn all about demonstratives in this video. Now on to demonstratives. Demonstratives are words that show relationships in a sentence between particular items. And the most common ones are this, that, these, and those. And we use these words to point to other things or people. This for singular things that are singular or near. So here I have a ruler. Look at this ruler. So this means it's near to me and it's only one. But if I put it further away, so I'm putting it on the table and point to it, it's that ruler. It's singular and far. If there were two of them, these, plural and near, and those, plural and far. Now some more rules to do with this and these. So this and these can refer to situations and experiences that are near in time as well, not just distance. And that and those can refer to situations and experiences that are far in time, not just physical distance. That and those are more likely if you're speaking hypothetically, because if you're being hypothetical, you're talking about reality being further away. In formal writing, this and that can refer to information from the previous sentence. This gives a sense of something being near, that a sense of being far. There is a lot of crime nearby. This is a cause for concern. So it gives a sense that the problem is near. Those who we use to mean the people who. This, that before an adjective can mean to a great extent. I'm going to win. I'm that confident. I'm confident to a great extent. This video teaches you about modal verbs in English. I'm going to quickly take you through all the rules you need to know. And I explain this a lot more in my 1 hour long video, which there's a link to in the description. But now, here are the main rules. Now, in this part of the video, we're going to look at modal verbs. We're going to look at the main uses of modal verbs in English, looking at the basic and advanced uses. Starting with can. We use can for ability, something generally true, something possible, permission in the present or future, requests, possibility, deduction of certainty, that's when it's in a negative form, and for extreme surprise. So let's just recap what can would look like in a sentence. Let's just remember what modals are for by looking at the word can. Look at the examples in red here. I can help you. It can't be true. In both of these sentences, the main verb is not the modal. Really, the sentence is I help you. But can introduces this extra element to the verb. Can here means I have the ability to help you, or it's possible for me to help you, or I have permission to help you. If I say it can't be true, then the main verb is be. We would normally say it is true, but we add can't in front to make it deduction of certainty. I am certain that this is not true. It can't be true. So instead of saying it is true or it isn't true, I use the modal in front, it can't be true, to show that I'm talking about my level of certainty here. Now, notice that be is not is anymore. So we use the modal can followed by the infinitive, which is help in the first sentence and be in the sentence. So modals are used in this way. They help tell us more about the verb, and the infinitive of the verb is used after them. Now let's look more at can. The negative form is cannot, or informally can't. Cannot means a lack of ability or permission, but cannot, when it's two words separated, may introduce permission not to do something. So there is a difference grammatically between cannot as one word and can not as two words. Can't as a question often means why can't, or is it not possible? So it's talking about the lack of possibility. With a stronger tone, can't might indicate annoyance at the start of a question. Can't you help me? I'm annoyed. With a stronger tone, can at the start of a statement can indicate a question. Can you help me? And can be sometimes means in some circumstances. This can be a useful video for some students who need to learn about English grammar. Can is not used for deduction, only the negative form is used in this way. So this lesson can't be over. That's negative deduction of certainty. But if I say the lesson can be over, it's got a completely different meaning. It doesn't have anything to do with deduction of certainty. Be able is an alternative to can for ability, permission in the present or future. I can do something. I am able to do something. To express ability or permission in the present perfect, then we need to use be able to instead of can. We can't say, I have can be able to do so. I have can play a sport. We need to say, I have been able to play a sport. And when qualifying ability or permission with another modal beforehand, select be able to instead of can. So you should be able to use the internet now. So should is the extra modal. So don't say you should can. Say you should be able to. So be able to is a useful alternative. Now let's look at could. Could is used again for ability, but this time in the past, or possibly the general present. Polite requests, past possibility, suggested actions, you could do this, past permission, future or present deduction with could be, past deduction with could have. If you're replacing can in reported speech, and for criticism for something not done. You could have done this instead, couldn't you? Here's some more things to know about could. The negative of could is could not or informally couldn't. Use could never have followed by the verb when you were unable to do the activity of the verb, and it would have been impossible to do it in the circumstances. I could never have expected such kindness. It was impossible for me to do it. How could I can be inserted into a phrase to mean with all my ability. I tried how I could. I tried with all my ability. Now, in Old English, I could not is sometimes used instead of I don't. But don't try it yourself. I'm just saying you might read it this way. It's Old English. Could have wished can be used for imagining what was possible in the past, such as, it was better than I could have wished for. So it's imagining what was possible in the past. I imagined it would be this way. It ended up being better. A few more things with could. Could have, followed by the verb, can be used for a possible future outcome, that will never happen. Oh, the internet broke. I could have had such a good afternoon if I could have watched the video. So could have actually means the future. Perhaps you're talking now about future plans, but the internet's broken and you're imagining, oh, I could have had such a good afternoon. But you're actually talking before the event. It's actually used for the future. Could subject not can be used in questions to make them sound more impatient or angry. Could you not keep quiet for a few minutes? Could and be able to are both used for past general ability, but only be able to is used for specific instances of past ability. So I can't say, yesterday I could climb the tree. You need to say, yesterday I was able to climb the tree, because it was one event. But when I was younger, I could climb trees. That's fine, because that's general, not just focusing on one event. Now, in the negative form, couldn't or be able to are possible when you're looking at specific instances of past ability. Now let's move on to may and might. The general uses are these: logical deduction in the present or future, logical deduction in the past with have and past participle afterwards, permission in questions, permission in responses. May I, but not might I. If you offer good wishes, we might say may. May you have good health, but not might you have good health. Pronounce bad wishes, which is the opposite. Again, may, not might. Stating general truths. Birds may migrate north in the winter. It's a general truth, but not might. If you're accepting something as true, that may be the case. Accept something as true. Probability, well, if you use might, then the probability is a lower chance than if you use may. May feels like a higher chance that something is true than might. And you could offer advice in a soft way with might. It might be a good idea to do this. Some extra things to know about may and might. The negative of might is might not, or occasionally mightn't. The negative of may is may not, but you can't contract it to may n''t. May or might as well introduces something when you're not going to succeed with your original plan. I can't watch all the video today. I may as well watch part of it tomorrow. But it's very different to may or might well, which means something is very possible. I may well finish the video today. Use might have and a verb for past lamentation, i.e. to tell someone they should have done something. Oh, you might have been better advised to watch the video in different stages rather than watching it all in one go. May have, followed by a verb, can be used for future speculation on a situation which is not possible. I can't go to interview tomorrow. It may have been a fantastic opportunity. And might is sometimes a preferred alternative to may in reported speech. Now let's look at must. We generally are familiar with must being for obligation and prohibition, but sometimes it's just a strong recommendation. Oh, you must watch this video. It doesn't mean you are obligated, but it's very strong advice. We can use must for certainty. This video must be the longest on English grammar. This is present and it's positive. Remember, with the negative, we use can't instead. With must have, then it's certainty in the past. It must have taken days to film this video. Yes, it did. You could use it for annoyance. Must you do that? Determination. I must keep going. It's determination. You're speaking to yourself. Motivation, encouragement of others. We must keep going. Things that are necessary, if you just simply want a stronger form of should. And strong conclusions based upon evidence. This video must be effective in helping people improve their grammar because people seem to do better in their exams afterwards. Here's some more things to know about must. As I mentioned before, with negative certainty or questions about certainty, cannot or can't is usually preferred to mustn't. Future obligations can be expressed with must, have got to, or will have to. So you've got these alternatives to must for the future when it's obligations. When an obligation is given to you, it is often reported with have to. If the obligation comes from yourself, must is preferred. Have to gives the sense that someone else is telling you to do it. When no obligation exists, don't use mustn't. Use don't have to or do not have to. And for past necessity, had to. You can't use must for the past when it's to do with necessity. How do we make past necessity negative? Well, you have to say had to not had not to. I had to not enter the building early in the morning. If I say I had not to, then it doesn't work in the same way. If you must can show disapproval or mean if you have no other choice. Well, I recommend that you don't go out today because of the rain, but if you must, then take an umbrella. You can use it must be followed by a verb and that to stress the verb in the gap. It must be said, it must be decided that English should be taught in all schools. Needs must is an interesting phrase. We use it on its own and it means something necessary to meet your needs. I don't want to take this job, but needs must. That means I need the job in order to pay for my building, pay for my flat, pay for my food. Needs must. And a must is actually a noun, meaning something you should do. So that's must. Now let's look at these semi-modals. Need to, have to, or dare. Need to and have to can be used instead of must for obligation, prohibition, and strong recommendation. Needn't is like don't have to. It expresses a lack of obligation. You needn't watch the whole video if your English is already perfect. There's no obligation. Has or have to can also be used for present certainty. This has to be true. And have to is often used when the speaker wants to give the impression that the rule came from someone else and they do not have the power to change it. I don't want to watch the video, but I have to because my parents told me and they are in charge, aren't they? Need to is grammatically similar to ought to. We add to in positive sentences, but to may or may not be used in negative sentences. And to is not usually used in questions. Need I go? So not need I to go, and need not to, but need not or need to not, ought not or ought to not. Now, need not means no requirement, but need to not means a requirement to not do something. So read that carefully. Need not, no requirement. Need to not, there is a requirement. What is the requirement? The requirement is don't do something. There's a lot of nots in there, but if you read it carefully, you'll get the sense. Now, needn't have can refer to actions in the past that were necessary. You needn't have put water on the table because now it's been spilled. It was unnecessary to do it. Now, dare is interesting because it takes on modal quality when it becomes a negative or a question, not when it's in the positive, unless it's in a fixed expression like I dare say. That means I believe with reason. And it only works in the first person. So dare is interesting. He daren't ask, dare I ask. Both of those have modal qualities because notice we're doing things that other words can't do. Now let's look at should and ought to, which have similarities but some differences. So here's a list of reasons why we use should. Generally for advice and suggestions, but also what is desirable. My perfect car should be blue. It's desirable for it to be blue. For obligation, if you don't want to be as hard as must. Stating the right thing to do. A good idea in the past which didn't happen. So you should have checked your internet before you started the video, then it would have worked. And a past action which wasn't a good idea. Wasn't a good idea. You shouldn't have left the food in the oven for so long because it got burnt. Should can also be used for something likely to happen. In conditionals, to say what is expected in the situation, which we looked at in the section on conditionals earlier. Go back to the first conditional to learn more about that. For planned times of events, it should start at this time. It should start this afternoon. The game should start at 7. It's the planned time. Or for the previously planned time, if it changes. So it should have started at 5 o'clock. But it's been delayed until 7 o'clock. And this can refer to the past, present, or future. With the past, you may not know if it started at that time. With the future, the planned time has changed. And you can also use should when commenting on people's actions. They shouldn't have done that. The negative of should not, should is should not, or informally shouldn't. You shouldn't have is a common set phrase that expresses thanks. When something probably won't happen, you can use if you should followed by the infinitive. Now, we looked at this in conditionals again, so I won't explain it in full. Go back to the section on the first conditional. And the same for 902 and 903. If you should followed by infinitive can be inverted. Should you? And should can replace would in the second conditional to increase the level of formality. So remember, those rules were covered in the section on conditionals, so go back to that section because I've already covered it there. Now, what about ought to then? In positive statements, ought to can replace should to make it more formal. In questions, use ought without to. Not ought you to do something, but ought you do something. The negative of ought is ought not to or ought not. We don't have to use to. And at the end of comparative sentences, ought can be used without to. Shall is similar to will, and we will look more closely at will in the section on tenses that's coming a bit later. So to avoid duplication, please also bear that in mind when we get to the section on will later. But we use shall for the future, polite offers, refusals, threats. I shall be taking action over this issue. Checking advice in questions. Shall we follow that instruction? An indication of requirements. When you start this job, you shall work every day. And to make instructions sound more official, which is similar to what the example I just gave. The negative form is shall not, but also it's an irregular form if contracted. Shan't. Now for would. Would has a lot of different uses. So I'm going to start with the basics and then I'm going to make it more advanced. The main uses of would are the past of will in reported speech. I will go to the shops. He said he would go. It can also be used for past habits and routines, but I'll say more about that in a moment. If you're being hypothetical, would is a key word for being hypothetical. We use it for polite requests or acceptance of polite requests, or if we're talking about the future in the past. In the past, when I was young, I was walking to school, but later that day, I would meet someone important. You could give a polite refusal with would, and you can subject comments as if they are doing it in the present. I would wait until later. So that's kind of giving you advice, really. We could also subject comments as if they were doing it in the past. I would have waited until later. So by saying would have, I mean before now. And I say subject because I mean I. Making claims less direct or more cautious. I think that's true. I would say that's more true. Would is used to state preferences politely. I would prefer this. For future speculation, I would have expected that it would be a hot summer. So it's to do with the future. Giving a reason for not doing something in the negative. I would go, but I can't because of this reason. If there's a willingness that cannot be fulfilled, then would be used for a similar reason that I've just given. For repeated past actions, they would go constantly to the same place. And if you're criticizing past habits, they would shout all the time, and it really annoyed me in the past. So a few things to know about would. It can be shortened informally to apostrophe D, I'd. The negative is wouldn't or would not more formally. Although would can be used for past habits, it cannot be used for individual past events or past states. And you can use as luck would have it as a phrase meaning very lucky. Here's some more phrases that we use with would. Would you believe it is a phrase meaning it's hard to believe. Would you mind is used for asking a favour. Would you mind opening the door for me? Would you mind as a complete sentence, though, without anything extra, indicates a lack of care in someone's action. So if someone bumps into you on the street, you say, would you mind? That actually means you think they didn't care. And advice is frequently given in English through, if I were you, I would. This phrase, a very useful phrase in English. You're going to learn all about quantifiers here. I'm going to tell you all the rules you need to know. And at the end, try my longer video that explains them in more detail. Now let's move on to quantifiers in English. And let's look at some, any, much, and many. Some and any mean an unspecified amount of a noun. Some usually with positive sentences, any with negatives and questions. So, for example, I'm looking at the room at the moment. I've got some pens, but do you have any pens? Much and many means a large amount of a noun. Much with uncountables, many with plural countable nouns. So I've got many pens here. Let's imagine I've got lots, but I haven't got much water in my cup because water is uncountable. Much and many can be used without the noun. They describe if it is clear from context. I don't have much. Some usually represent a positive meaning. If asked in a positive way, expecting yes as an answer, some can be used in a question. Any usually represents a lack of something. When meaning not many, any can be used in affirmative clauses with a negative word. So, for example, hardly any, rarely any, when it means not. In affirmative sentences, much or many often come after to, so, as, or how. Too much, so much, as much, how much. Many is more common in affirmative statements than much. So I have many things to say, and a lot of is often preferred to much in affirmative sentences. But much can be a subject on its own, meaning a great amount. It is often used in this way with positive clauses and informal writing. I have much to say on this topic. Much has been written about English grammar. I'm going to take you through all of the main rules for using the passive in English. If you want to know more with examples, then click on my video, Everything You Need to Know About the Passive. But for now, here are the main rules. Let's look at the passive form in English now. The passive form is essentially formed by moving the object of an active sentence into the subject position. Now, you have to make these grammatical changes in order to form the passive. Move the object to the front, move the subject of the sentence to the back, add by before the subject, and change the verb to the past participle. Add to be before the verb. So let's look at how this works in practice with an example. A teacher taught me. I was taught by a teacher. So a teacher moves to the back. That's the subject to the back. Me goes to the front. I. By goes before the subject, by a teacher. The verb changes to the past participle, taught, and the verb to be goes before the verb, was taught. You can convert from passive to active by following these rules in reverse as well. And the tense is changed in the passive by changing to be, not the main verb. So was shows the tense here, not taught. When there are two objects and an activity is involved, you can usually start a passive sentence with either object. A drink was given to her. She was given a drink. So notice the both objects can be in either position. Be careful that to be and verb plus ing. This is not the passive form. The past participle needs to be used, the ed form. So, or the past participle form. Not was giving, but was given, past participle. There's a difference between transitive and intransitive. Transitives can be made passive, intransitives cannot. An object is usually required to make a sentence passive. Sometimes you can introduce a dummy subject, it, in order to get around this, but in general, you need to have the object. And when there is an activity, you can make a sentence passive, but sentences with state verbs cannot usually be made passive. With dummy subjects then, the subject of the sentence comes after the passive structure. It is known that people like chips. So people is actually the subject and the passive structure all comes first. It's like a cleft sentence put in there. Sometimes this leads to a lack of clarity. To write in good English, make sure it can only refer to one noun. So be careful with that. If you've got multiple nouns, make sure that it clearly refers to the one you want it to. When there are two clauses and the subject is the same in both clauses, the passive can be shortened in the second clause. Non-defining passive clauses can be shortened too and moved to the front of the sentence. We don't usually use the passive with object infinitives or object that clauses as well. So these are some more advanced rules that you need to follow. To look at this in more detail, go to my video on my channel, which is Everything You Need to Know About the Passive, where I give examples of all of these rules. I'm just covering the basic rules quickly here, but I do go into this more in my video on the passive. We can use the passive for activities where there is an object before the infinitive. If a phrase describes the object, it must stay next to the object when it moves in the passive form. If a phrase describes a subject, it does not move with the object in the passive form. And we often avoid making passive sentences with two verbs next to each other. But when there is active participation upon the subject, by that second verb, the passive is more natural. So again, some quick advanced rules on the passive here, but I've put a link in the video description to a video that I've produced before that explains the passive in much more detail and goes through all of these things with examples. As I've said, this video is intended to give you a quick overview of all the rules in English, but I unpack this all more in other videos that I've produced on the channel. So go to the video description and click on the link to every passive rule video that's there, and you'll get a much longer description. Instead of by, you can use with. This means before the subject. So with the example I gave, I was taught English by a teacher, I could say I was taught English with a teacher or with a book. And this introduces anything used by the agent. So the teacher used a book. So I was taught by a teacher with a book. I could say I was taught with a book. Through means the means to achieve the action. I was taught English through a series of lessons. And of goes with certain verbs, such as scared. When active sentences follow the pattern verb, object, verb, we often add to in the passive with exceptions. Again, watch my more detailed video on the passive to learn to see examples of this. Verbs such as born, repute and rumour are almost always passive and not used in the active. So you cannot say I born something, you have to say I was born. This part of the video teaches you what you need to know to use prepositions correctly in English. And at the end of it, watch my longer video, which will give you examples of everything I'm going to teach. Now for the preposition rules quickly. In this part of the video, we're going to look at prepositions in English in detail. This is a quick overview of all of the preposition rules you need for English. I have another video which looks at everything you need to know about prepositions in English, which will go into the examples in more detail. So watch this for a quick summary of all the rules. Go to my longer video on prepositions if you want to explore this in more detail. There's a link in the video description. So let's go through prepositions of manner. By, with, as for, in, via. By means achieved through, with, something you use, as in the same way, for, introduce a purpose, in, introduce the way something is done, and via or via, a formal way of saying the means by which something is achieved. These are all prepositions that you can use to show manner in English. With movement, of, up, across, down, through, over, and around. These all indicate the movement of something in the ways explained here. Now with place, you can use in for things in contained spaces. It's in a box. Within weather features, distances and places with problems, such as in hospital, in prison. Weather features in the wet, in the cold. You can use at for speeds. I'm traveling at 100 kilometers per hour. Or on for connection to surfaces. It's on the wall. Or journeys. I'm on a trip. Now for advanced choices with prepositions of place. In we use for general locations, at for fixed locations, but we can use at for somewhere around a fixed location. So at the station means somewhere around the station. In the station means within the boundaries of that location. For vehicles, use in for vehicles where you don't move around. So I'm in a car, I have to sit. Or on for vehicles where you can move around. I'm on a train. I can move around the train. For directions on a compass, in introduces north, south, east, west alone, but on for compass directions, which are adjectives. With maps, on for many things that a map shows. In to describe being within a geographical feature. So it's on the river, for example. Where's the holiday going to be? It's on the river. Where am I now? I'm in a forest. And here's a longer list of other prepositions of place beyond in, at and on. Above, under, beneath, next to, behind, in front of, between, near, opposite, amid, which is in the middle of something vast or dense, over and around. These are all prepositions of place we use in English. Now for prepositions of time. Firstly, with in, at and on again. In is for extended time periods, in a few weeks, or within a time period. At is for specific times of the day, at 3 o'clock, or special days, at Christmas. On is for days and dates. On Monday, on Christmas Day. So at Christmas, on Christmas Day. And this is the note below. Use on for special days if the phrase finishes with day, and at to mark the point in time when something happens. What about the position of prepositions? Well, the usual position is you have preposition comes first, then the article, then the noun phrase. There might be some alternatives. If you're with a question and the question word is the object, the preposition usually goes at the end. If the context is known, everything can be omitted except the question word and the preposition. That's talking about questions again. If the preposition is something happening to the subject, it can come after the verb without a noun. So, this is what I use a pen for. It comes afterwards. This is where I'm working at. It comes after working. Prepositions can come after infinitive complements as well. Now for preposition position with relative pronouns. When the relative pronoun is the object of a sentence, a preposition can go at the end of the relative clause. This is a pen which I write with. Formally, the preposition can go before the relative pronoun as well. This is a pen with which I write. Other rules with position. Of indicates possession. So these are rules that are not position now. These are other rules. Use of to indicate possession. It's the pen of the teacher who works here. Due to or because of indicate a cause or reason, and they work in a prepositional sense here. I'm staying at home because of the rain. You can use by with public transport when you're saying how you travelled. I travelled by bus. You're going to learn all about subordinators in English now, but more advanced subordinators. We looked at the basic ones earlier. Then watch my full video, Advanced Conjunctions in English. Okay, in this section of the video, we're going to look at subordinators of time. Now, we looked at common subordinators earlier in this video. I'm going to reintroduce some now, but then I'm going to introduce some more advanced subordinators that replace them. So I'm just going to recap some of the subordinators so we're clear what we mean by them. Remember, a subordinator is used when you have two clauses. One clause is independent and the second is dependent on the first clause. The dependent clause is the subordinating clause. For example, I went to the park after I heard about the very nice ice cream stand there. So after the very nice ice cream stand is the subordinating clause. It only makes sense if it's connected to the clause before, I went to the park, because it's explaining the time connection between the two. So after is what we call a subordinator, because it introduces this dependent subordinating clause that explains more or explains the relationship or some information about the first clause. So here are subordinators of time. Now, as with other parts of this video, the purpose of this video is to go through the rules you need really quickly, all in one place. I've got other videos which go through all of what I say in this particular video in more detail with examples and explanations and more teaching. So I put a link in the description to another video on every conjunction that you need in English. So if you want, at any stage you're going through this and you think, I want more examples of what you're saying, Rupert, click on that link and it will take you to the video that gives you all of my teaching with all of the examples you need on everything that I'm presenting here. So very quickly, common subordinators of time are after, as, before, during, once, until, when, whenever, while, and since. But here are some more advanced subordinators of time. Just as, which introduces something at exactly the same time. The crowd started clapping just as the music stopped. As long as can mean a certain length of time. We promised to keep on playing for as long as the people wanted. As soon as gives the moment when something else can happen. The band will start playing as soon as the pianist arrives. The moment can mean immediately when. The music started the moment that the lights came on. At the time that is similar to the moment but less precise. Most people were home at the time that the band was playing. Now for subordinators of manner. The common ones are as if, as though, how, and like. But more advanced ones in the way that introduces the manner of the main clause activity. The cafe was decorated in the way that the customers requested. However, now this is a subordinator of manner, and we looked at this earlier in the video, meaning no matter which way. They couldn't serve everyone on time. However, they tried. So in any way they tried. In whatever way means it doesn't matter which way. Again, we'll make sure everyone gets a seat in whatever way we can. In such a way means a particular way to enable an action. We've organised the chairs in such a way that you can sit together. Now, common subordinators of place are anywhere, everywhere, in which, where, and wherever. But more advanced, in the location where means the precise place of the next clause. I'll meet you in the location where the map indicates. In the vicinity of the noun means near this place. I expect as it is in the vicinity of the camp place. And the point where is similar to in the location but more precise. At the point where the river meets the sea, there are strong currents. In whichever place is a more formal alternative for anywhere. There's lots to see in whichever place you arrive. And at anywhere means at any of the places of this type. Feel free to stop for a rest at wherever you find a beach. Common subordinates of distance are at where and to where, but more advanced to the point where introduces the direction and destination. She got to the point where the children's books were kept. At the point where, or that, means the exact place. We stopped searching at the point where the books ended. To the extent that refers to a distance in an abstract sense. The library was successful to the extent that satisfaction was 100%. Common subordinates of frequency are always, commonly, frequently, generally, never, often, rarely, seldom, sometimes, usually. But more advanced ones are each time. So that introduces individual time something happens. Each time the cockle crowed, the other chickens looked up. Every time focuses on all the time something happens. The chickens fought every time food was thrown into the barn. At any time, that means all times are possible. Come to my farm and see the chickens at any time you want. In the instance that means in one specific time, which could recur. In the instance that a chicken sits on her eggs, do not disturb her. Common subordinators of reason, as, because, and since, but at a more advanced level. In that introduces the reason for a suggestion. It was an excellent sofa. In that it was good for relaxing on. Seeing that shows that an action has been influenced by another. Seeing that no one was sitting on the sofa, I decided to lie on it. On account of, followed by the noun, means because of, but with consideration. Don't get up on account of my needs. In the light of represents a decision based upon something recent. I need to sit down in light of the bad news I've just heard. Common subordinators of purpose. In order that, so, so as to, so that, or to. But more advanced ones, for the purpose, introduce why something is done. I'm wearing this suit for the purpose of looking smart. In the hope means something that is done intending this outcome. I looked at the older clothes in hope of finding a bargain. With the intention of introduces the planned effect of an action. They entered the shop with the intention of buying a new outfit. And with a view to introduces a future plan based on the main clause. She bought a dress with a view to wearing it at the wedding. Now for subordinators of result. The common ones, therefore, consequently, thus, hence, as a result. More advanced with the consequence that presents the direct result of a situation. The wind changed with the consequence that it got cold. Resulting in indicates the final outcome. The snow fell all night, resulting in all of the roads being blocked. Leading to in the noun introduces the effect of the main clause. Demand for energy was high, leading to power shortages. which in turn introduces a result coming as a natural consequence. Many people bought new clothes, which in turn boosted the economy. Now for adjective clauses. So these are phrases which tell you more about a noun, but at a more advanced level. In which, at which, for which, of which. Look how they work. London is a city in which you can easily get lost. So this introduces the location or situation of something. Meet me in the nearest place at which the bus stops. So this goes with the place where something occurs. London buses are a form of transport for which we are grateful. So for which is an alternative to the structure which plus clause plus for. And of which gives information about one aspect of the main noun. A number of options were given for the main course, of which one was a salad. I am going to take you through all of the important rules for tenses in this part of the video. All of these rules are included in a much longer video that I've produced, 1 hour long, that goes through all of the tense rules with more examples. Here's a quick guide to what you need to know. Now, in this part of the video, we're looking at tenses in English. This is going to be a really quick overview of all of the rules you need to know about tenses in English. If you at any stage want examples of these rules, particularly the advanced ones, please click in the link in the video description to my video where I have 120 tense rules in English explained. That goes through all the rules I'm going to go through quickly in this part of the video, gives you examples of each and explains them in detail. But if you want a really quick, fast overview of everything you need to know about tenses in English, this is it. Keep listening for the next 10 minutes. I'm going to go through it quickly for you. First of all, the present simple. The present simple is used for facts, truths, descriptions that are true now, present habits, present routines, timetables, future time, instructions, where we're not using the imperative, formal correspondence, permanent situations, state verbs, and official announcements. The present continuous is used for present activities, activities that are happening close to now, actions that are repeated over and over again, future arrangements, temporary situations, changes, activities at specific times, so things that happen at a planned specific time over and over again, and also for present behavior. If you're describing present behavior, you are being. Nice, you are being. Lovely. Being here is the present continuous of the verb to be. Now, sometimes we have to make a choice between the present simple or continuous. For physical feelings, use either. With the historical present, that's when you use the present tenses in order to tell a past story but make it feel more real. Use the present continuous for background, but the present simple to progress the story. Here and there are words that we normally use in the simple tenses when it's present. Now, you can use the present tenses to show annoyance at bad habits, and you can use simple or continuous for this. If you want to add extra emphasis to a present simple or present simple sentence, use do. I do go to the park every day. I'm emphasizing that fact, but use am for the continuous. I am trying my best at the job. Now let's go to the past. Use the past simple for finished actions, finished states, past facts, so things that are not facts now, past descriptions, past habits, linking past events in a sequence, permanent situations that were in the past, or sentences with that as the subject usually have past simple rather than past continuous. The past continuous is with finished activities, the longer of two actions, background to a story, descriptions of different events at the same time where we don't progress time. Temporary situations of the past, things that were not designed to be permanent but just for a short time, or past activities often repeated. Again, there are some extra things we need to know and choices we need to make between both of them. We usually use the simple form for past ideas that are no longer true. So Smoking was considered good for you, but now it's considered bad. Smoking was bad, was good. It's a past idea, no longer true. When using the past for hypothetical present or future, like with the second conditional that we learned about earlier in this video, simple or continuous form could be used here. And we can use the past for distancing with verbs for mental activities. And you can use either form, but the continuous is more commonly used. So this is where I was wondering if you could help me, which is distancing, creating distance in time to make it more polite. Rather than saying I want to know something, I was wondering. Present continuous here makes it more distant. It's easier for the person to receive the request. It's more polite. Now for the present perfect. Very quickly, the main rules. The present perfect is for activities recently completed, states recently completed, or if I want to connect the past to the present when I'm talking about a past activity. We should also say that when we say connecting past to the present, we mean where the past is unfinished. We're talking about something in the past, but it wasn't necessarily finished, or the time period we describe is unfinished. It's all the way up to the present. I have been to France. Well, that means at any time in the past up to the present. Now, why are we choosing between the present perfect simple or continuous? Present perfect simple focuses on completion of event. Present continuous focuses on the activity itself. The present perfect simple, something being permanent. Present perfect continuous, temporary. Some other phrases. This is the ordinal. This is the first time I have written such a long video and spoken so quickly in it. Most of my other videos I explain in more depth. If the activity is in focus, then we could use the continuous instead, though. This is the first time I have been speaking so quickly. And if you state how long an activity has taken until now, use the present perfect continuous. Some other things to consider and choices to make. Use either simple or continuous. If you're maintaining present time while introducing past events, it doesn't matter which tense you use here. The present perfect is common with already, just, or yet, although in some varieties of English, the past simple is more common with these words, such as in the US. Now, here's a trend that often happens. News reports commonly start with the present perfect to give general information about an event, but it's switched to the past simple for the more specific information. Now, the past perfect. Now, this is where you use had instead of have. Had plus past participle for a particular purpose. We use the past perfect to make it clear which event happened first when events are not in order. For repeated events before a point in the past. When we're being hypothetical about the past. For events immediately before another in the past. For reporting speeches already in the past, although sometimes we stick with the past simple for this. For intentions that are in the past and wishes that did not happen. All of these would take the past perfect, had past participle. We'd use the simple form for states up to a point in the past, but the continuous for temporary situations up to a point in the past. Now, you can use either the simple or continuous for activities up to a point in the past, which is sort of different to some of the other tenses. With events in time order, the past simple is preferred to the past perfect. Normally, we use the past perfect to show that events are not in time order. When the past perfect is followed by a subordinator and a clause, it's common to use the past simple in the subordinating clause. But when it's followed by a coordinator and a clause, it's common to use the past perfect again. So subordinating clause, go back to the past simple. Coordinating clause, stay in the past perfect. That's the simple rule to follow. Now for speaking about the future with will. We use will for expectations, certainty, promises and offers, giving consent, intentions, plans made in the moment, to predict something where we've got no physical evidence, if you're giving orders, threats or refusals. We can also use will for the present tense, when we're making the request stronger, or to show inability to do something, expressing annoyance with someone's behaviour or describing typical behaviour of something, and also for generally accepted truths about behaviour. Remember, I've got lots more examples. I go into this for over an hour in my video 120 English Tense Rules Explained. Click on the link in the video description if you want to see that video and learn all about this in more detail. Now, when speaking about the future, we can also use going to. We do this for plans already made, when we predict things based upon physical evidence, when we're making future arrangements or restating previous decisions. So that's how we distinguish between will or going to when we're speaking about the future. We also have the future perfect, which is will, have, and past participle. The future perfect is used for completion of something by a known time, activities up to a known time in the future, or when we're anticipating things, either with no evidence or when we're anticipating what people already know. It's kind of like a present perfect use with these two particular rules. We can use will have to for necessity after the present. Now, with the future continuous, we mean will plus be plus the ing form of the verb. We use this for predicting future activities or expectations of what you think people already know. And here's the note again about will have plus past participle being used to express certainty about what is already known in a present perfect sense. Future in the past is when we're telling a past story and then we predict things that are going to happen after the time of the story we're in. So we can use would or the past continuous in order to do this. And we do this with events after a past time, plans after a past time, unfilled past plans, which is usually was going to or were going to, or arrangements after a time, which is normally when we use the past continuous. We were meeting them later, but then it didn't happen. You're going to learn about the verb rules in English in this part of the video. As usual, I've got a longer video that explains all of the rules in more detail with examples. But if you want a quick guide to some really important advanced rules for using verbs in English, watch now. At this part of the video, I want to give you a quick overview of all of the advanced verb rules in English beyond looking at tenses. Just how do we use verbs? The purpose of this video is to give you a quick overview of everything. I'm not going to stop on any rules quickly. I have another video on advanced verb rules in English, which you can follow, where I will explain everything in more detail with examples. So there's a link in the video description below me. If at any point you want to know more about anything I'm saying, go to that video link, click it, and you'll get a video on me explaining all of the advanced rules that are in this video. Let's go through all of the rules you need to know quickly now. So let's start with the subjunctive. So the subjunctive form is an old-fashioned form of English where we use the infinitive of the verb to be, or we simply use were when we're being the past of to be instead of was. So the subjunctive uses the verb infinitive instead of changing for tense in the second clause, usually when showing importance or being hypothetical. The use is fairly formal and not common, so you don't have to use it, but you may come across it. Now, if you're being hypothetical, we use the past subjunctive were. For importance, use the present subjunctive, which really simply means using the infinitive form. Transitive, intransitive. Some verbs are transitive, that means they need an object. Intransitive means they don't have a grammatical object. Ergative is transitive when the subject does the activity, but intransitive when the subject receives the activity. So there's a change depending on whether you're giving or receiving the activity from transitive to intransitive. Other verbs can also change to transitive to intransitive with no meaning change, like driving. I am driving a car, both are possible, or with meaning change. I returned. That means I came back. I returned a book. That means I gave back. Now, transitives can be passive. Intransitives cannot. So look at the video on passives or the earlier part of this video on passives to learn more about that. A number of verbs can take two objects, and these are called ditransitive. So those are the general rules. What about when we have a direct object and an indirect object? When we have a direct object before an indirect object, we separate these with a preposition. So he gave a car to me. So to comes before me. But the other way round, we don't use the preposition. He gave me a car. When converting to the passive and the indirect object moves to the start of the sentence, the direct object goes before the subject. I was given a car by the garage. When the direct object moves to the start of the sentence, the indirect object goes after to, but still before the subject. A car was given to me by the garage. A few verbs cannot be followed by the pattern indirect object and direct object. These verbs must take the direct object first. Describe, explain, outline, and share are main ones. Usually verbs describe the activity in a clause, but delexical verbs can shift the activity onto the object, like I'm going swimming. What's the activity? Swimming. But the verb is go. It's delexical in this case. A number of English verbs are a combination of two words. Brainstorm comes from two individual words. Copular verbs link the subject to an adjective or noun that comes after the verb. Copular verbs are followed by nouns and adjectives, but not adverbs. Some verbs can be copular or non-copular, which depends upon the type of verb and the subject. So taste. It tastes nice. So nice describes it. I tasted a meal. Taste here is the action of doing the tasting. So it tastes nice. Nice is here is copular because nice describes the subject. I tasted the meal. Here it's non-copular because I'm doing an action. Now on to the causative. The causative is used when something happens because the subject arranged it. In other words, the subject doesn't do it. Made means forced to do something. Let is allowed to do something. Get, the subject arranges for someone to do something. And have, something was done for the subject. Why would you use get or have? Well, get emphasizes the forcefulness of the arrangement, have the activity. Most negatives require an auxiliary, but feelings and mental processes, you can use verb plus not when answering questions. So, I think not. It's the opposite of I think so. So, I think not. That would be an alternative here for a mental process. Many verbs require a preposition to go before the object. I am listening to music, not I'm listening music. I'm looking for a pen, not I'm looking a pen. If the object is dropped, the preposition is also dropped. I am listening, not I am listening to. State verbs and active verbs. State verbs take the simple form, whilst active verbs can take the continuous form in a suitable context. Most verbs are either state or active, but some verbs, so what that means is most verbs are either state or active, not both. So some verbs are active, some verbs are state. But some verbs to do with sense can be both state and active. Mental process verbs can sometimes be state and active as well. Some verbs change between state and active depending upon whether you are discovering the quantity of something, in that case it's active, or you're reporting the quantity of something, in that case it's state. The verb to be is usually a state verb to show permanence, but it can be an active verb to show temporary behaviour. You are being difficult, for example. Here it's active. To see is usually a state verb for information received through the eyes, but it can be an active verb for relationships and meetings. I'm seeing a friend later. Now for gerunds and infinitives, and there's a lot of rules to get through here. Gerunds occurred when we turn verbs into nouns by adding ing at the end. They can be subject, object, or complement of a sentence. Speaking is an essential skill, but speaking can go in different parts. So speaking is the gerund, speak with ing. Now, instead of the gerund form, we can also use to plus infinitive. It's usually used in the object position, only occasionally in the subject or complement position. So the most common one here is the entry requirement is to speak English, coming after the verb is. Sometimes to plus infinitive is short for in order to. So to pass the test, you must follow the advice means in order to pass the test. There are no clear rules to dictate whether a verb is followed by a gerund or to infinitive. Many patterns just simply need to be learnt individually, verb by verb. But verbs that express intentions are more likely to be to plus infinitive, plan, expect, hope. And verbs for mental processes are more likely to be to infinitive, seems, thought, believed. Many verbs for likes and dislikes are gerunds. Enjoy, detest. A number of interaction conversational verbs are followed by the gerund form. We discussed going. I mentioned travelling. I recommend carrying. When the passive form is used to report things that are sensed, we often follow the past participle with the ing form of the verb. So with hear, some people were heard whispering. With see, they were seen leaving. Now, see can be seen to leave. When the passive form is used to report instructions, we often use the past participle with to plus infinitive. They were advised to take extra lessons. A verb can become a noun when it comes after a preposition. Such verbs usually take the gerund form, except when they follow to. I'm tired of travelling. She's interested in sightseeing. But some exceptions. He was happy to find a cafe on site. When verbs follow an adjective, we usually use to plus infinitive. It is interesting to read about its history. So interesting is an adjective here. However, in the structure adjective preposition verb, the verb takes the gerund form. I am sick of listening to your music. So here we have sick is the adjective, and then of is the preposition, and then we use the gerund form. So if it's to, then it's infinitive, but if it's a different preposition, then we use the ing form. When a possessive introduces a verb as belonging to itself, the verb becomes a noun and takes the gerund form. I like her acting. So we use the possessive to refer to the person. When a noun suggests an action is required, we commonly use to plus infinitive for the action. My proposal to travel to India was agreed by all the family. Now, go and come have interesting rules. After go and come, use the gerund if you are focusing purely on the activity. Let's all go running. But if the verb represents an activity constrained by time, use to plus infinitive after go or come. I've come to run in the marathon. Certain verbs usually take to plus infinitive when following go or come. So where are you going to work? So work is one that would take to. A number of verbs can complete the structure go, come, and bear infinitive. Why don't you come and play with us? Go and ask your mother first. So it's where you have these two together. Go and something. Come and something. Very informally, especially in American English, you can drop and. Stop bothering me. Go play. Very informal. Most modals are followed by a bare infinitive. You must speak to me. I couldn't make it. However, semi-modals take to plus infinitive. You have to stay off the grass. I need to take this course. You ought to take more care with your driving. No one dared to say anything after the manager told them off. Some verbs that are usually followed by a gerund change to the structure verb plus noun plus to plus infinitive. People advise renting. Well, this can become we advise you to rent. And it's the same with allow, encourage, and permit in all of these examples. Some verbs can be followed by the gerund or infinitive with no meaning change. Began to work, began working. No meaning change. We can use either. Continued, hate, like, love, and started are all the same. But what's important to know is that sometimes the meaning does change when we switch between the gerund and infinitive. So I need to help is different to I need helping. Need to help, it is necessary for the subject to do this. Need helping, it is necessary for someone to do this for the subject. Will you go on to study at college? This means in the future, but will you go on studying means continue. Prefer can be followed by a gerund or infinitive, but is often followed by a gerund when directly comparing to something else, and an infinitive when not comparing us directly. Do you want to work? I prefer to run. But I prefer running to walking. Some verbs are followed by the infinitive without to. This is sometimes called the bare infinitive. I'm going to let you join the team. Could you make him try harder? They help the visitors find the right path. I would rather have, why not try? So in all of these cases, we have verbs with the bare infinitive. The last one, we have a combination of why not followed by try. It's not try followed by visiting, because visiting is the gerund. It's the structure, why not? With some sense verbs, the verb that follows can be the infinitive without to or a gerund. The gerund form often emphasizes a sense of activity in the moment. I can see the plane coming into land. I saw the plane coming to land. So the gerund form emphasizes the activity more. I can see the plane coming into land. That's the activity in the moment is important here. It's the same with watch, heard, and felt in the other examples here. A few verbs are followed by to plus gerund, which is something that people are often surprised about. I'll get around to painting. I'll look forward to hearing. I'm not accustomed to living. I can't adjust to working. Confess to stealing, admitted to lying, are devoted to reducing. So we have to plus the gerund form, which is a surprise to some. And there are more. Dedicated to improving, committed to meeting, opposed to punishing, object to making, am used to taking, get used to learning. To plus gerund in all of these cases. Now we're going to look at the rules for participles in English. We're going to go quickly through the most important rules you need to know. I'm just going to summarize them in this video. If at any stage you want to go into more detail or you're thinking, I want to see examples of what you're teaching, go to the video description, find participles, click on the link to the video that I've produced that goes into all of these rules with far more examples. Let's get started with this quick overview. The present participle in English is the same as the gerund form, verb plus ing, and is used in the formation of the present continuous, past continuous, perfect continuous, future continuous tenses. But also we have participle phrases, adjectives and adverbs. Let's look at these latter ones in more detail. They are not verbs that indicate time once they become the present participle. So for continuous tenses, the verb to be indicates the time. I am running. Am shows the time, or I was running. As a participle phrase, adjective or adverb, tense would be indicated by the other verbs within the clause. They form participle phrases to describe an action by a verb, by a noun, usually the subject, state reasons for an action by a noun, provide more information about a noun, or give the results of an action by a noun. These phrases often start a sentence before the subject, but they can also follow the noun in a reduced relative clause. Present participle phrases would usually go before a pronoun. Now let's look at the past participle. So it's often formed by adding ed to the end of a verb infinitive, but there are many verbs with irregular past participle forms. We know this most commonly in perfect simple tenses. I have been, I have looked, I have caught. So if you have the word, the verb form after have, that's the past participle. So we often use it for that, but we use it in other situations too. Now, when we have perfect continuous tenses, been is the past participle, and then the verb has the ing form. when we make the passive voice, we use the past participle. But we also have standalone phrases, adjectives, and adverbs, which are formed by using this past participle without any other verbs in a clause. And here are some rules that go with it. The form is sometimes the same as the past simple, but it is different to the past simple because it doesn't indicate tense. Imperfect tenses have indicates the time. I have been. He has been. So has is making the change. With the passive voice, the verb to be indicates time. Participle phrases, adjectives, and adverbs all require a separate verb to show the tense. They form participle phrases to describe a noun, add extra information about a noun, reduce a passive form, or reduce a conditional if clause. At the beginning of a sentence, they are non-restrictive. In other words, they do not define a noun. If you have a phrase with a participle at the beginning of a sentence, then comma, then the main sentence is not defining the noun. Now for a perfect participle. This is always having, and it's always followed by a past participle again, having caught, having been, and it tells us about something the subject did previously. Other features of participle phrases. You can use not before a participle to make it negative. Not can go after the participle if the negative only affects the part afterwards. With present participle phrases, we can use no after the verb to indicate the lack of a noun. Having no money, for example. Participles usually describe the subject regardless of whether they come at the beginning or end, but not always. This is most common when they are non-restrictive. So usually a participle phrase will describe the subject afterwards. Having no money, he went home. So having no money describes he. There are some exceptions to this. They could describe the object when they are defining and at the end. Something you don't hear a lot of is a misrelated participle. It and there can go with misrelated participles. So when these words are in the subject position and mean something exists, a participle phrase does not necessarily describe them. So having no money, it was time to go home. So it simply describes the time. It doesn't describe the person. So having no money actually has nothing to do with it. It doesn't describe it. Here, the participle phrase simply introduces something that's relevant that leads to the next phrase, but doesn't describe the subject. When the participle phrase presents the opinion of the speaker, it does not necessarily describe the subject or object of the sentence. The rest of the sentence could merely follow on logically. It is possible for a participle phrase to have its own subject that comes directly before the participle, but this is uncommon. So, Sheila having no money. They went, it was time to go home. Now let's look at relative clauses that involve participle phrases. Relative clauses with a noun phrase can be reduced to participle phrases when the participle follows the relative pronoun or to be, or the clause contains instructions in the pattern relative pronoun plus present simple verb. In this case, the verb changes to the present participle. Now for some rules involving adjectives ending ed or ing. So adjectives ending ed can indicate a subject complement which has been acted upon, so in a passive sense, or a subject complement indicating the completion of something. They can go immediately before a noun to describe something that happened to it. They can go immediately before a noun to describe an achievement related to the noun. Now switching to adjectives ending ing. They can indicate a subject complement which describes the subject, or a subject complement which gives the subject a sense of action, immediately before a noun to describe the nature of a noun, and immediately after a noun to create a compound noun. Now, if you want examples of all of those and a longer explanation, click on the link to my video describing participles in English, which you can get in the video description below. Now let's look at participles as adverbs. Participles, which are adverbs ending ed, can introduce an action affecting the whole sentence. When it's ing, it tells us how the subject did the action in the sentence. Certain participles change meaning depending upon whether they go before or after a noun. Involved means detailed when it comes before the noun, but means what we are focused on when it comes after the noun. Concern means worried when it comes before the noun, and what we are focused on when it comes after the noun. Punctuation is so important in English, and I'm going to teach you the main rules in this part of the video. We're now going to look at punctuation in English. This is a vital part of English which you cannot miss out. Having good grammar includes using punctuation properly. So let's start with using question marks. At a simple level, a question mark ends a sentence that starts with a question word or auxiliary. So if you start with an auxiliary like do, did, the verb to be, have, or a modal verb, then it's automatically going to be a question. Sentences that act as questions but that do not begin with questions or auxiliary words should not end with a question mark. So sometimes we have embedded questions. We've looked at that in the very first part of this video, right back at the beginning where we looked at questions. So embedded questions don't put the question mark at the end, but they are still questions. Now, what about exclamation marks? Well, why do we use them? Exclamation marks is the big line at the top and the small dot underneath. We use an exclamation mark to show surprise, humour, or very high significance. We don't tend to use this in formal writing. So if you're writing a story and you're reporting what someone says, and it has surprise, humour, or very high significance, you could use that exclamation mark. But if you're writing more professionally, don't use it. Full stops are what we use to end most sentences without questions or exclamations. There are some exceptions we'll come to in a moment. Bear in mind, Americans call a full stop a period. It's this little dot, like this one, at the end of a sentence. British full stop, American period. We don't always use full stops though. We use commas a lot in English. It's that little line at the bottom that goes down and across. That's a little bit longer than a full stop. Using commas properly is really important in English. It can affect your grammar. It's easy to get wrong, so follow the guidance here. Firstly, use a comma when you list items in a group. For example, I have different coloured pens. The pens are red, comma, yellow, comma, blue, and green. So as I'm going through the list of different items that are similar, I separate them with commas, and I write and before the final noun. Now, there is some discrepancy about whether you use a comma before the final and. It's encouraged by some but not all style guides. You'll find that Harvard University and Oxford University differ on whether you should put a comma before and. So this is a bit more flexible. Now for commas with introductory words or phrases. Any words which come before the sentence subject, for example, a linking word, can be separated from the main sentence with a comma. For example, in this sentence where I started with the words for example, if I wrote it down, I would have had for example, comma, and then my sentence. That's the usual thing to do. Some, very few, maybe a few newspapers around the world don't follow this, but this is standard. So if you have an introductory word or phrase before the main subject of the main sentence, use a comma before it. Extra information clauses. Sometimes extra information changes the noun and sometimes it does not. When the information does not change the noun, surround it with commas. So let's look at two examples. The people who watched the video. That would mean only people who watched the video. In this case, no comma, because the information after defines the people. It tells me the people that I'm talking about. But if I say the people on Earth who are part of a population of 8 million, then I would use a comma to separate them, because here I'm not defining people. I'm talking about all people. The information who are part of a population of 8 million is just extra information about all of the people. So it's not defining. And when it's not defining, when it's just extra information, it doesn't change the noun, then I need a comma between the people in the world, comma, who are part of a population of 8 million. What about with dependent clauses? There is some flexibility here, but in general, when a dependent clause comes before an independent clause, separate the clauses with a comma, exactly as I've done here, actually. When is a subordinate conjunction, and it introduces the dependent clause. This part, the first part of the sentence, is a dependent clause. The second part is the independent clause, and I've used a comma because it's come before. But if I switch the order, I would not necessarily need to use a comma if the independent clause comes first. Let's move on to semicolons. Semicolons are where you have one dot at the top and then a comma underneath. These link two sentences with similar meaning or logical link. So you can replace a full stop and use a semicolon instead if there's a similar meaning or logical link between two sentences. But only use semicolons to link sentences which are independent. Well, I couldn't have done it here because one was dependent and one was independent. Now, in informal English, people increasingly use a dash instead. Colons are this symbol here, the two dots. Why do we use colons? Well, we could use colons instead of a full stop when we're introducing a list, where we get to the end of a sentence and then we just add the words which are the list afterwards. We could have our sentence, then the colon, then the list. I have a number of pens, colon, red, white, and green. If you introduce bullet points, the final sentence can have a colon before. If I introduce a direct quotation in some situations, then use the colon, but we'll come to quotation marks in a moment. If I introduce an example of something, sometimes I have a full sentence and then colon and then the example afterwards. And it's all subject to this point here. The sentence before a colon must always be a full clause, which includes a verb. And now you're going to learn everything you need to know about nouns in English. In this section, we're going to look at how we use nouns in English. We're going to start by recapping the basics of a noun, what a noun consists of. We looked at noun phrases earlier in the video. We're just going to recap it here because this will give the context for the slides that follow. So let's remind ourselves the following types of word can go before the main noun to make a noun phrase, usually in this order: article, determiner, possessive, and adjective. Remember, an article is a type of determiner, and determiners can be split into the pre, main, and post determiners. Watch the part of the video earlier on that looked at noun phrases in more detail. Now, after the main noun, this is called post modification. We can have a preposition phrase, relative clause, a to plus infinitive clause, and it's worth reminding ourselves that you can use multiple preposition phrases. But again, go back to the section on noun phrases earlier in the video for more detail on this. But now the advanced noun rules. Now, nouns can sometimes be used as adjectives. I've got a Samsung phone. Well, here Samsung is a noun describing the phone. So nouns can take that place as an adjective. They're describing the noun more. Compound nouns are two nouns joined together. This is achieved through joined compound nouns. So cell phone, that's two nouns that make one word. A part compound noun, cell phone, where they come together. Cell is describing the phone, but we don't put them together in terms of their vocabulary usage. And hyphenated compound nouns, son-in-law. These need to be learnt. There are no set rules that I can give you to help you here. You need to learn which ones take one pattern or another. Some words have more than one pattern. Nouns could be in the following positions: in the subject position before the verb, in the object position after the verb, and as a complement it goes after the verb, but yet it describes the subject before it. Nouns can be within a preposition phrase. So this is an example, within a preposition phrase. So phrase is the noun, preposition is an adjective, a noun acting as an adjective. The article within is the preposition itself. So that's an example there. Sometimes two objects are possible, the direct object which receives the action and the indirect object which receives the direct object. So she gave me a pen. The pen receives the action and I receive the object. The order can be changed by using to or for. So she gave me a pen. She gave a pen to me. She gave a pen for me to write with. You can place it before a clause for a direct address, who an instruction is directed towards. And an alternative possessive form for nouns is article noun of noun. So this is my pen. This is the pen of the room. But there are more rules. We wouldn't normally say the pen of the room. It was just an example of how the grammar looks. But in a moment, I'm going to tell you more about when you should use this alternative possessive form. Let's look at action nouns first of all. In some sentences, the noun carries the action, not the verb. This is common with the following verbs: hear, need, have, take, make, give, do. So let's pick on hear. I can hear a sound. The action is actually sound, isn't it? Music. Take your turn. What's the action here? It's the turn, not the take. Now on to possessives. Possessives show that a noun belongs to someone or something. Possessive, singular possessive noun, add apostrophe s, but plural possessive noun, add s apostrophe. So if I say Rupert's pen, it's apostrophe s. But if the pen belonged to a whole group, you'd say the group's pen, the group, and then s apostrophe to show that it is plural. Now, irregular plurals, you add apostrophe s to as well. So, for example, people. You wouldn't do s apostrophe, it would be apostrophe s, peoples, apostrophe s. For singular nouns ending s, then add apostrophe s. For singular nouns ending s, then if they're older forms, then just use the apostrophe after the final s. So Jesus, for example, finishes in an s, just put an apostrophe, no extra s. This is what we do with the old form. Now, pronouns have their own possessive forms, my, mine, your, or yours, so you don't have to use apostrophes here. Now, some abstract concepts, such as time, can be possessive in English. For example, a week's work. Well, weeks is apostrophe s because the work belongs to the week. It's an abstract concept, but we still do it. And sometimes we choose between a possessive form or noun of noun, as I mentioned earlier. Now, why would we choose noun of noun? Well, the possessive form is more commonly preferred for the following: people and animals. So Rupert's, apostrophe s. Rupert's pen, not the pen of Rupert. But in many other situations, we'll use the noun of noun. So the story of the week, or the trophy of the competition. So the trophy of the competition, it's the competition's trophy, the competition of the trophy of the competition, because competition cannot really own anything because it's too abstract to own anything. So we prefer the noun of noun for this situation. When the first noun means a part of the second noun, use noun of noun, like a slice of cake, not a cake slice. And measurements are often noun, number, noun, noun. For example, a 2-litre bottle with the hyphen in the middle. An important part of using nouns is understanding nominalization. Verbs can be turned into nouns with a sentence structure change. Look at the following. We suggested watching this video. We changed suggested from a verb to a noun through this. We made a suggestion about watching this video. and this makes it more formal. Adjectives can also be turned into nouns. Some parts of the video were difficult, so difficult is an adjective. Move it to the front. The difficulty in some parts of the video was at a high level. So I've had to change the whole sentence a bit here, but it shows how we can change adjectives into the noun form. Nouns that alter according to gender are becoming less used. However, some are still accepted. So actress or actor. Actress is female. Actor is male. Then on the female side, waitress, hostess, headmistress, duchess, princess, heroine. They're all still used. Waiter, host, headmaster, duke, prince, hero. They're all still used as gender-bound nouns. With pluralization, it's important in English that the subject and verb must agree. A singular subject means you should have a singular verb. For example, the film starts at 9 p.m. The film is singular, the verb starts is singular. But plural subject and plural verb, the mountains overlook the city. So not the mountains overlooks the city, but we have a plural subject, the mountains, so the verb must be plural too. We add s to most singular nouns, es to most singular nouns already ending in s. If you have a noun followed by the word and then another noun, so ladies and gentlemen, for example, this is considered plural, so the verb is affected by that. Noun or noun is considered singular unless the nouns are already plural, in which case noun or noun makes the plural. Here are a few simple rules to follow when making words plural. Consonant plus y, remove the y and add ies. You add es to the following endings: sh, ss, ch, x, and z. And many Latin-derived words have irregular forms. A becomes ae, us becomes I, becomes a. O often becomes ee, like tooth becomes teeth, to make the plural. And some words are always plural, like for items where two things always exist, such as glasses, or when what is left is incomplete, for example, the remains of a building. Countable and uncountable nouns. There are some rules that you need to know on this. Most words can be counted, for example, 1 cup, 2 cups, but some words are not usually counted. These are uncountable. Liquids, abstract nouns, concept nouns, and items measured by volume, such as rice. You cannot say 1 rice, 2 rice, 3 rice. We don't do it because there's too many of them. We would just say a bowl of rice or just rice on its own. Some collective nouns are uncountable and many weather types are uncountable, like rain. We don't say rains, we say rain, although cloud can be clouds. Adjectives that become nouns with ness tend to be uncountable. So kindness. We wouldn't say 1 kindness, 2 kindnesses, 3 kindnesses. It's just kindness on its own. And many major illnesses or conditions are uncountable. So you wouldn't say the person has 3 cancers. You just say the person has cancer. Much and little are uncountable, whereas many and few are countable. Whilst these and this can go with countable nouns, only this can go with uncountables, not these. And the following groups of nouns are countable or uncountable depending on context. Animals are countable, but if you talk about the food from animals, it's uncountable. So you can have 1, 2, 3 chickens if they are on a farm, but if you're eating chicken, it's uncountable. Adjectives with mental uncountable words become countable, but mental uncountable words without an adjective remain uncountable. So the adjective actually changes the mental uncountable words, so you can now count them. Uncountables can sometimes become countable when described as a type of. So a type of milk, for example. You could have 2 types of milk. And when uncountable nouns describe another countable noun, the phrase can be counted. So a water bucket, for example, a water mole, a milk float, 2 milk floats, 2 milk bottles, 1 milk bottle, but milk on its own, uncountable. We need to know about the way that nouns start and end. Let's start with the endings with suffixes. Common ways that noun end. This is not an exhaustive list, but this helps you sometimes to identify a noun when you're reading it, or to make sure that you are using an ending of a noun correctly. Having some idea is helpful. So ANCE refers to the quality or process, for example, guidance. EE means a lower level role in a job, employee. Hood is a stage of life, parenthood. Ist often means they can do this, capitalist. Ness quantifies an adjective such as carelessness. OR or ER is to do with an occupation like farmer. Ship means joining a role or a role of something like citizenship means you become a citizen. With prefixes, anti is opposite or against. Auto means self, automotive, a motive for yourself. Bi is two of something, like a bicycle has two wheels. D means remove. Declassification means it stops being classified. The classification is removed. Dis is for not. Disagreement means there's no agreement. Mega means very large, like a megastore. Mis means error, like misinformation. There's an error in the information. Non means not. For example, non-fiction. It's not a fiction book. Over means too much. Overestimation means you estimated over the amount too much. Post means after. So post-war means after the war. Pre means before. Preview means you view before perhaps others would. Re means again. So reapplication means you apply again. Semi means half. Semicircle, half a circle. Super means more than something, like a superhero. Tele is a long transmission. So telescope, you're looking at something that's transmitted from a long way away. Tri, three of something, like a triangle, three sides. And uni is one of something, like the universe, there's only one. And under means less than. Underestimate. You estimated below the amount.